Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto Reincarnation of Tobirama Senju Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for Part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the third Hokage and the third ninja to gain the title of God of Shinobi, could only stand frozen and watch as his two predecessors stepped out of their coffins. His teachers, Hashirama Senju and Tobirama Senju, stood before him in all their undead glory, courtesy of Orochimaru's forbidden jutsu. The only relief he had was that the third coffin, which undoubtedly held his one and only successor, Minato Namikaze, failed to rise out of the ground, and was promptly swallowed by the dimensional void that had summoned them in the first place. It changed little as before him still stood two of the greatest Senju that ever existed and the founders of the Hidden Leaf Village. Hiruzen? Is that you? Asked Hashirama. You've gotten old, Sara, Tobirama said. Yes, it is I. It's been many years since both of your deaths. You've been summoned back to the world of the living through the use of the reanimation jutsu, thanks to a rogue student of mine, Orochimaru, replied the old Hokage after managing to gain a semblance of composure. Yes, I just couldn't help but find the entire situation satisfyingly ironic. Seeing my former sensei getting killed by his own former senseis, after which I'll unleash them upon the village they struggled and endeavored so hard to build, said Orochimaru with a sadistic smirk. The first Hokage put his hand on his face in exasperation. No matter what era, there is always conflict. Yes. Isn't it wonderful? Orochimaru chuckled as he pulled two kunais with a sealing tag attached to them. The action hadn't gone unnoticed by Tobirama, analyzing them at a moment's notice and quickly discerning their purpose. Before the pale-skinned man could react, he went through several hand signs. After finishing them, the reincarnated Hokage's form glowed brightly for a second, and his sickly pale complexion gained a lot more vitality and color. The other spectators all stared at him in confusion, before Tobirama went through a sequence of new hand signs and put his hand on his brother's forehead. A large seal formula spread out from the point of contact, which both the sanin and his former master recognized as a contract seal. Orochimaru could only watch in disbelief as Hashirama's soul was released, and the ashen body started falling apart, revealing a sound genin inside it. How did you free yourself? It is impossible, Orochimaru demanded and raged. The second Hokage gave him an intense look. Do you take me for an amateur stripling? I had always considered the possibility that the reanimation jutsu might be used against the village, for which reason I created a countermeasure. As of now, I am no longer under your control. As soon as he was done elaborating, he made a single hand sign, instantly putting the former leaf ninja on guard. Water style, water shockwave. A giant wave of water was created out of thin air, hurtling with frightening ferocity towards the sanin. Forming a hand sign of his own, he created an earthen wall to defend himself, the superior of the two elements effectively blocking the attack. Keeping the hand sign, Tobirama called out a new jutsu, water style, severing wave. A highly pressurized beam of water shot out of his mouth and cut through the wall, as well as one of Orochimaru's arms. Jumping back, the snake summoner opened his maw wide and out of it came a new pair of arms, which grabbed the edges of his mouth and forced them apart even further, allowing his completely healed form to rise out of it. He frowned at this sudden change of events, quickly coming to the realization as much as it burned him to admit it that the invasion was over. There was no feasible way he could fight two Kages of their caliber, and Tobirama alone was probably too much to handle by himself. As it was, his body was already weakening. The time for a new body would soon be at hand, and he'd never been one for unnecessary risks. It was better that he survived and destroyed the village another day than die right now and never see his dream of mastering all jutsu come to fruition. Pull the barrier down. We're leaving, Orochimaru ordered through gritted teeth. Right, yelled the sound force simultaneously. After the purple barrier was dispelled, the sound ninja made a quick getaway, leaving the two Hokage on the roof to watch them retreat. The physically older of the two approached the other, Tobirama sensei. I cannot thank you enough for this. The second Hokage just nodded. Yes, it appears to be fortunate that he has revived me, despite the unfortunate intention behind it. I am sorry about that. Orochimaru used to be a student of mine until he went rogue for various experimentation on people. He apparently has a desire to learn the secrets behind all jutsu of this world, a desire that has driven him mad. Hiruzen's face turned grim. Tobirama crossed his arms and thought. The last time he had seen his student was before he had enacted the suicidal plan to act as a decoy for the Kinkaku force in order to allow 6 of his subordinates to escape. And Hiruzen had only been 22 years old when the title of Hokage had been unpremeditatedly dropped on him. Seeing him now, in what appeared to be his late 60s and still with the Hokage title, if the robes discarded to the side of the roof were of any indication, he was curious about the state of affairs of the Hidden Leaf Village. There was the option of remaining, at least for a short while, to assess the current condition of his village and offer his assistance, though there could be arguments about how his presence would tip the balance, or went against the laws of nature. Bah, he was a shinobi, not a religious zealot. He colored outside the lines, and he especially didn't pay heed to any nebulous, abstract rules with no concrete foundation. He had sworn to ensure his village's protection and prosperity, and if he did it post-mortem? Well, if there was a god or a few up there, they could suck on it for all he cared. A Kage's primary concern was always his or her village. I shall stay here to help you capture and kill him. He must be stopped, and no one can threaten the village and get away with it. The fact that he can perform my jutsu with greater success than myself is worrisome, too. Plus, the traitor had tried to use his body and power to kill one of his students. He rarely took things personally. He was too jaded a man for that, but he could make an exception for the pasty-skinned bastard. Hiruzen smiled warmly at the prospect of his undead teacher staying for a longer amount of time. I am grateful for your help, sensei. Tobirama just smiled back and looked out at the village that was still in the middle of an invasion. There will be time to reconnect later. Now, we must end the invasion. Who are we fighting against anyway? He asked as they both jumped from the roof. My ex-student's own village, the Hidden Sound, and the Hidden Sand village. Originally, they were our allies, but Orochimaru somehow persuaded them to attack us. I assume he took advantage of their rather poor economic and military state to convince the Kazekage to renege on our alliance, the old man replied, landing a flying kick on one of the Sound Shinobi. The reanimated Hokage nodded as they got to work in taking care of the invaders. He was well aware that the Land of Wind's lack of natural resources put the Hidden Sand in a precarious position economically wise. The very reason the first Kazekage had demanded 30% of the payment the other Kage were going to give for the tailed beasts, and a part of the Land of Fire's fertile land. Though he hadn't disagreed that the price had been high, he had been much more vehement against the expected threats of war, sudden but expected, which spoke a lot about the ninja of their time. He remembered the headache being the first feeling he got when the first 5 Kage summit had gotten rowdy. Not a gasp of surprise, not a shout of outrage, but an exasperation-induced headache. Reto's high demands aside, he had empathized with the man's efforts to guarantee his village's future. He hadn't forgotten the trials he and his brother had gone through to realize their dream, nor the countless losses the entire ninja world had suffered before the wave of peace, however temporary, had swept through the continent. He had not been ready for another war, or at least not a war born due to the other Kage's petty reactions to the Kazekage's fairly reasonable request. A request they themselves could have empathized with. For the sake of establishing peaceful rapports between their respective villages, concessions could have been made. Should have been made. If they had, perhaps this wouldn't be happening today. Perhaps, for the rest of the day, they fought the invaders. Thankfully, due to his reanimated body, he had limitless stamina and chakra, even though he could use only as much chakra as he had when he was alive at any given time. The Leaf Ninjas were buoyed by the arrival of not only their third Hokage, but the second as well. The fighting ended not long after their arrival, quickly becoming obvious that the forces of the Hidden Sound and Hidden Sand were no match for them. As they watched their people cheer in elation, Tobirama couldn't help but ask something that had been nagging him. Saru, I wasn't able to sense much Senju chakra. While there are traces here and there, they are faint. Why is that so? The conclusion was pretty obvious, but the notion was so hard to even consider, he wanted to hear it from the horse's mouth. Hiruzen flinched and seemed to hesitate. That didn't bode well before turning to him. I'm sorry, sensei, but most of them have died fighting in the rest of the first and the entirety of the second and third Great Ninja War. Not to mention that, during that period, most Senju newborn were female and most of them married outside the clan. As it stands, the only person who carries the surname Senju is Tsunade, your grandniece. Sadness and frustration welled within his zombified body. The greatest shinobi clan in the world, his family, was practically gone. Wiped off the face of the earth by the passage of time like a stone that had borne the brunt of too many waves. It was nigh inconceivable. On that note, that also meant something else. Then I have no descendant, no heir, sullenly said the normally composed man. The third Hokage gazed at him thoughtfully. He didn't know whether he should tell him, but looking at the man, morose as he was, he knew he couldn't keep the truth from him. He never could lie to, or omit the truth from, Tobirama sensei, even when he wore his default expression of sternness. Besides, it had gone on long enough and this was the golden opportunity he'd been waiting for. He wasn't about to let it slip. Actually, there is one more. You do have one descendant, the aged Kage said. Tobirama looked at him in surprise. I do? Who is it, and how is this person related to me? His name is Naruto Uzumaki, and he is your great-grandson. He's close to 13 years old and a genin of the village. Your daughter married Kanzuya Namikaze, and they had a son who was named Minato Namikaze, who ended up being the fourth Hokage. Tobirama raised an eyebrow. If that is so, how come you're still Hokage? He asked, even though he already knew the answer to that question. Hiruzen pursed his lips. He hated having to tell his teacher about his own grandson's death. He died 13 years ago. How, if I may ask? The second Hokage inquired further, ignoring the small pang of grief at the news. On October 10th, 13 years ago, the Ninetales attacked the village, and Minato died to protect it. His sensei looked as if he was slapped out of the blue, barely able to form a coherent thought. The Ninetales escaped from its Jinchuriki? Saru, how did this happen? Don't tell me it was Mito who. The third Hokage shook his head. No, it wasn't her. She had been dead for over a decade already. The name of the second Jinchuriki was Kushina Uzumaki. She was Minato's wife, and she had been giving birth to a child when the Ninetales somehow escaped, though I don't know how that was possible. Minato had been with her, and he was an accomplished seal master. The best theory is that someone must have intervened and released it while the seal was weak. The theory is supported by the fact that the Nine Tails had suddenly appeared in a cloud of smoke in the middle of the village. A summoning, thought Tobirama, which was an amazing feat in and of itself, as only 2 people had been able to do it, Madara Uchiha and his brother Hashirama. However, the cursed Uchiha had died a very long time ago, so it couldn't have been him. Not to mention that the only way to summon a tailed beast was to take control of it. It was doubtful that someone else had with style, which left only one other option, the Sharingan. This was something that Tobirama had been trying to prevent, the birth of a new Madara. A personal mission that he had assigned to himself. To realize that he had possibly failed was like a blow to the gut for him. Minato had used the Reaper Death Seal to imprison the Nine Tails inside a newborn baby, sacrificing his soul to the Reaper in exchange, Hiruzen stated with a tinge of sorrow, recalling the feeling of uselessness as he watched his successor and his wife die from outside the barrier. And this child is the one this Kushina woman had given birth to, and the child is Naruto, correct? Tobirama said after putting the pieces together. Hiruzen nodded and suddenly turned sad, which did not go unnoticed by him. What's with that face? His student took a deep breath before sighing in resignation, looking up at him forlornly. He hated to be the one to break this to him. I was there when Minato died. Before passing on, his dying wish was for everybody to treat Naruto as a hero. Of course, for that to happen everybody had to be aware of the baby's newfound status. Tobirama scowled at him, causing the old man to look like a deer in headlights. Despite the fact that he was now nearly 2 decades his senior, his sensei still made him feel like a greenhorn child. Why? If what you say is true, the Nine Tails should have inflicted significant damage to the village. Many people must have died, while others left traumatized. Why release his status as a Jinchuriki after that? Tobirama demanded. How could the fruit of his own loins be so stupid? He wondered what his student's excuse was. Hiruzen sighed and looked at him, which caused Tobirama to soften his glare when he finally noticed just how truly old and tired he was. Both me and Minato were just that naive, I'm afraid. As you've already guessed, his plan didn't work out as well as hoped, not by a long shot. He was hated and shunned for all of his life with very few people who actively showed care for him. I certainly couldn't force people to change their opinion, the old Hokage said. Noble sentiment doesn't equate positive results. The second Hokage scoffed at such a quixotic notion. He had dealt with enough of that during his brother's reign. That was a very foolish decision my grandson made. I have also noticed that you gave him his mother's clan name instead of his father's. Why is that? Minato had made many enemies in the Hidden Stone and the Hidden Cloud during the Third Great Shinobi War, where he earned the moniker the Yellow Flash for refining and perfecting your flying Raijin. We were still recovering when the Nine Tails attacked. The risk of assassins and kidnappers was too great. It's also the reason that I didn't tell Naruto himself of his father, Hiruzen stated. Tobirama sighed and acknowledged his point, despite the pain his great-grandson must have gone through. With whom did he live? Sarutobi's sheepish visage told him all he needed to know, and Tobirama's glare was back at full force. He understood the need to hide his heritage, but this was unacceptable. In order to keep the balance of power among and avoid favoritism, it was decided that no clan should have a Jinchuriki in their family. The decision had been supported by the feudal lord himself. There was nothing I could do about it. He lived in the orphanage till he was 6. After that, I managed to get him his own apartment. The second Hokage was a very calm and collected individual, almost never caught off guard, but at that moment, he felt rage like rarely ever before. This wasn't why the village was built. It was built to destroy the boundaries between the clans and to be a place for children to be just that, children. But they willingly let a child be mistreated due to paranoid fantasies. His own great-grandson, and the son of the 4th Hokage no less. Tobirama had little doubt that at least half of the clan heads had known that Naruto was Minato's offspring. It was the Hokage who was expecting a child for over half a year. He clenched his fist before heaving a great sigh of frustration. There was no point in getting worked up now. What was done, and nothing could change that. However, that didn't mean that nothing could be done for the boy's future. I shall train the boy myself, and stay with him until I deem it appropriate to leave this world. There is no way I'm going to allow a member of my family to grow in solitude and pain if I can do something about it. His heritage should be revealed to him if no one else, Tobirama declared, finality evident in his tone. Hiruzen smiled. I will give you the documents that state and prove your blood relation to him. While I still believe this is a very vile jutsu, sensei, I can't help but be thankful for it just this once. Naruto can at last meet an actual member of his family, and finally catch a break in his life. 2 hours later, Tobirama could be found in a hospital room, staring down at the prone form of his great-grandson as he slept. The reports said that he fought the One-Tails Jinchuriki, who had used a full-tailed beast transformation, but Naruto had managed to summon the chief of the Toads from Mount Myaboku and had been able to create over 1,000 shadow clones, a jutsu of Tobirama's own making. His descendant came out of the battle victorious. As he looked down at him, he couldn't help but notice the physical resemblances they had. The spiky hair, the same shape of the face as he had when he was his age, his nose, and other, more subtle similarities. Yes. This boy was without a doubt his progeny, and as the second Hokage, he swore to help him in any way he could. What's the status? The second Hokage and his successor, along with his other 2 former students and a trusted subordinate, were currently in the Hokage's office checking a status report regarding the invasion that happened 2 days ago. Hamura and Koharu had been elated to see him after such a long time, while Danzo had remained oddly stoic but expressed pleasure at his prompt arrival. On the other hand, Tobirama's joy had been based more on the fact that they'd survived till this day, since it was like they'd been separated for no more than a couple of hours from his perspective. Still, seeing them weathered and old had really brought home the fact that it had been a long time, despite having already met the much older Sara than he remembered. Koharu especially looked like the stress of their profession and advanced age had affected her, her wrinkles more pronounced and standing with a slight slouch that made a part of his undead heart ache. Danzo, well, his phlegmatic poise, so very different from the prickly temperament he displayed when he had last seen him, spoke far more than the cane and his bandaged appearance. To be honest, the 2 versions of Danzo almost seemed like separate people. He barely recognized the man. Hiruzen hummed before answering Tobirama's question. All in all, we're quite lucky. Though nothing to scoff at, there aren't as many casualties as I previously thought, and infrastructure damage could have been much worse. Our forces will be stretched thin in the foreseeable future, and it'll take a while to recover our strength. How bad are we talking? Koharu asked wearily. Not so bad that we can't accept all mission without leaving a sizable enough force behind to defend the village. That's good. With the recent invasion, the security of the village takes priority, Tobirama stated. Regardless, we mustn't show to our clients and the other villages that our power has dwindled, so we'll still have to accept all the mission requests we are sent. The third Hokage agreed full-heartedly. They truly were fortunate in that regard. Yes. We'll give some of our ninja time to recover, while the ones in better shape will handle the missions. I think it would be a good idea to give the village repairs as mission requests for Genin and some Chunin. Tobirama nodded in approval. Speaking of Genin, I'd like to have Naruto's official documentation and his birth certificate. I'd also like you to tell me something about him. His dreams, skills, teammates, mission performance, etc. Sarutobi smiled. Well, it's best you hear about his mission performance from his sensei, but I think you'll be happy to know that your grandson strives to be the greatest Hokage in history. Tobirama's just raised an eyebrow, not an unusual goal. Despite his seeming nonchalance, his student could see the happiness at the thought of his descendant becoming Hokage. You will be training our Jinchuriki, Lord Second? The reincarnated Kage frowned at Danzo's choice of words, the old man's thoughts on his grandson being very apparent from that alone. A wise decision. It's about time the boy received proper training, and while he's still young and malleable. Proper training? What is that supposed to mean? Tobirama demanded stonily. What it means is that one Naruto Uzumaki, whose potential should have been cultivated to the point that no one else in our village could match him, is weak. As he is now, it would take a miracle for him to reach Jonin status before the age of 20, Danzo said, his expression not giving anything away. And yet, he defeated Shikaku and its host. We all know the power the tailed beasts possess, Danzo, and not just anybody can take one down, Hiruzen responded, a proud smile gracing his face. Although, his friend's unhesitating criticism, even in the presence of Naruto's extremely powerful ancestor, still left him rather uneasy. Gaara of the desert is young, inexperienced, and of unstable mental health, not to mention that the one-tail's strength was tied to the condition of its Jinchuriki, the shinobi of darkness argued firmly. The boy's own absurd levels of chakra and stamina kept him alive more than his skill and intelligence, nor could he have won without Gamabunta's aid, or that of the Nine Tails. In fact, if it weren't for the latter, Naruto Uzumaki would have been effortlessly beaten in his first match of the Chunin exam's third round. Internally, the third Hokage winced at the truth in that statement. As much as he would have liked to deny it, Danzo wasn't outright wrong in what he was saying. Naruto had little in the way of refined skill, physically and mentally wise, and Hiruzen knew from experience that determination could make up for only so much. A part of him had always feared that one day it would lead to his downfall. One of the main reasons Kakashi Hatake had been placed as his teacher was to try and prevent that. But Naruto still wasn't growing at the rate he'd hoped for. He was afraid the Uzumaki's boundless determination would be more a curse than a blessing, that his desperate attempts at attaining a seemingly unattainable dream would leave him miserable, if not drive him mad with grief. That was the last thing any of them needed, least of all Naruto. However, the aged Kage was unpleasantly reminded that he had the worst poker face among the four elders when Tobirama's eyes narrowed while gazing in his direction. That glare made him feel like a bucket full of cold water had been spilled down his back, just as it had in his younger days. Neither did the white-haired man fail to notice that, though shifting a bit uncomfortably, his two teammates appeared to be leaning a bit more to Danzo's side, as if at least partially agreeing with him. I'm afraid I'm a little out of the loop here due to my, 47-year absence, the second Hokage said, crystal clear sarcasm in his tone, as though mocking their intellectual capabilities. Therefore, I'd appreciate if you spared me the suspense and just explained what the hell you're all talking about. Tobirama's suspicion, coupled with a slight foreboding sensation, only increased when the four elders glanced at each other, like a bunch of brats deciding whether to let him join their clubhouse. For God's sake, they were technically his seniors. Why couldn't any of them just give him a straight answer? Did they not trust him to keep his composure, no matter how grave the news? After a little while, Hiruzen resigned himself to bringing whatever the issue was to light. It pains me to have to tell you this, Tobirama Sensei, but for the first few years of schooling in the academy, Naruto's education was sabotaged and meddled with. What? A rare expression of enraged dumbfoundedness crossed the undead man's face, demanding an explanation as loudly as one of Might Guy's youthful wails. I'm afraid it gets worse, he continued with a measure of cool composure he didn't know he had, for all the sorrow he was feeling at the moment. Unfortunately, it caused a chain reaction of events that lead to Naruto's growth being stunted, not only as a ninja but as a person. Tobirama inhaled through his nose while crossing his arms in an attempt to remain calm, though his grip was much tighter than usual. What he was hearing was outrageous, his mind making interpretations of his students' words at a pace that was almost too fast for him to take in, and each one making him angrier than the last. Nonetheless, he stomped down on the urge to throw a childish fit. He was the clueless one here and knew better than to make accusations before they laid out all the facts to him. Explain. Now, the simplest explanation, Lord Second, is that Sarutobi was too soft and too trusting, Danzo huffed. He took the ideals of the will of fire and blew them out of proportion, acting on them in situations where they did more harm than good. While the man in question glared lightly in response, Tobirama noted that he didn't refute the statement either. Odd, considering the fact he was practically smitten with the Senju philosophy. Enough, Danzo. Hamura interjected, tired of their squabbling. Do not let your disagreements make this conversation any harder and lengthier than it needs to be. A moot point in the second Hokage's opinion. He was planning to needle them for as much information and excuses as they could give him. Still, he was glad that Hamura did his best to keep the two on track. Even now, it looked like their rivalry hadn't abated. They were just a bit more mature about it. Just a bit. I underestimated how deep the villagers' resentment of Naruto went, the current Hokage said, lighting his pipe with a low-level fire jutsu. The scorn from the civilians was expected, but it seems that many of our shinobi were affected almost as badly, despite the trauma of the recent war, though I suppose that a tailed beast appearing in the middle of their home village is something else entirely, especially for the younger generations. Most of the academy's staff consists of shinobi from those generations, mere teens at the time of the attack, since most of the older ones who'd held a position there were killed by the Nine-Tails. Koharu added her 2 cents. Some of them lost loved ones, some didn't know how to process the incredible fear they felt that day, and others went through both those experiences. Hiruzen nodded in agreement. From everything I gathered, Naruto did study hard and pay attention at the beginning, but the faculty teachers used various ways to tarnish both his schooling and, consequently, his reputation among his peers. The investigation showed that it ranged from using genjutsu to mix up the questions on his tests, giving him harder exams on purpose, to throwing him out of class for the most trivial of reasons. And in all that time, it never came to your attention? Tobirama asked, somewhat incredulous. For good reason, too. The Hidden Leaf Village was chest-deep in shinobi. Someone should have been able to notice or connect the dots. Actually, Naruto did bring it to my attention, but being a guardianless orphan, I assumed that he just had trouble learning. I helped when I could, but I was far from being available on a daily basis, his former student replied sheepishly. So you just assumed he lied? A child telling a lie is a harmless, everyday occurrence, certainly much more acceptable than the possibility that our shinobi were so full of hatred that they'd willingly take it out on an innocent boy. Danzo's cutting remark prevented the third Hokage from answering. This is what I meant earlier when I said you blew the will of fire's ideals out of proportion, old friend. Because of that, the boy lacks proper training, a proper education, and the proper childhood you so foolishly believed was possible. Hashirama's brother knew that Hiruzen always had the best intentions in mind, but he'd never been blind to the fact that he sometimes had his head in the clouds when it came to certain ideas and notions. He had believed it merely a phase, that the Hokage position would help him grow out of it. There definitely was a great change in him, a sort of pragmatism and grimness he used to lack, but clearly not as much as Tobirama had hoped. Argue later, you two. Hiruzen, please continue, Koharu said calmly but insistently. The Hokage nodded in thanks before resuming his tale. In any case, his sabotaged education led Naruto to believe that studying was pointless, and his lack of contact with people makes him oblivious to the many social mannerisms that we take for granted. It became even worse when he started doing pranks to get attention, even if it was of the bad sort. By the time I found out he'd been telling the truth, the damage was done, and getting him to form efficient study habits was an exercise in futility. The old man was glad his sensei was such a composed person, his rigid posture being the only sign of his growing anger. He didn't think he could handle someone as powerful as him going on a rampage. The end result is that his great social shortcomings, lack of education and stunted growth make him seem like an annoying and idiotic nobody in the eyes of his peers and the ones who don't know of his burden. Tobirama was silent for a few moments, just staring at his old subordinates with an intense gaze, before inhaling deeply. Not that his reanimated body needed oxygen, but it helped his equanimity. He was sure more bad news was on the way, and throwing a long temper tantrum was beneath him as much as it was unproductive. Alright, but what about his adoption? I can understand keeping the clans from doing so, but I'm sure some form of arrangement could have been made, the white-haired man demanded. A sense of awkwardness permeated the air as all four of them, for some reason, looked either embarrassed or irate. That didn't bode well. It's because of the civilian council, sir. They prevented us from making any such plans, including even apprenticeship, Hamura explained, a note of frustration in his tone. Tobirama raised a disbelieving eyebrow. He knew well about that particular council. He founded it, after all. However, it wasn't really a ruling body, but a group of people, all civilians, who held significant clout in the various business sectors of the village, from merchants to bankers. The council's main purpose was to inform the Hokage and his advisors of the Hidden Leaf's economic issues and discuss advancements, solutions, and such. The secondary purpose, rather obvious to anyone with half a brain, was to show that the Hokage cared about the opinions of the civilian class. So how in the world could they have had a say on Naruto's living arrangements? Or even his training? Hamura continued before he could ask. The Nine-Tails attack nearly left our village destroyed. A lot of the infrastructure was laid to waste, along with many business locations. For a short time, we were economically crippled. The only reason we avoided bankruptcy was because of the remaining families of the civilian council who pitched in and made the Hidden Leaf's recovery possible. I fail to understand what significance that has regarding Naruto, Tobirama Senju said. After Hiruzen revealed Naruto Uzumaki's status to the villagers, there was outrage, calling for the child's head in the belief it would also kill the Nine-Tails. Kohara took over from her teammate. Thankfully, the civilian council was aware of the importance of having a Jinchuriki, but they threatened to leave the village if Naruto was given any form of special treatment, including adoption and apprenticeship. And you let them get away with it? He growled out. We had no choice, sensei. Hamura rebuked firmly. The primary and secondary sectors, the ones that were necessary to build the village back up, are mostly comprised of civilian workers and employers. The shinobi have very few experts in very few of those fields. We thought of threatening them by denying protection should they decide to leave, what with all the increased criminal activity after the war, but they could simply buy such services elsewhere. The village was in ruins. The fact is, we simply needed them more than they needed you, the second Hokage finished for him, gritting his teeth at the truth of it. He gave them a hard look. Still, you're telling me that you, the Leaf's most experienced shinobi, couldn't outread a bunch of civilians? Tobirama-sensei, Hiruzen said with authority, causing them all to straighten up on instinct. Tobirama gave him a weird look at the tone. I understand why you're upset, but you will show respect. You might have held the position of both advisor and Hokage, but those days have passed, nor are we your subordinates anymore, however we may address you. The fact is, you weren't there to witness the aftermath of the attack, or come up with the solutions, so I will not accept any undue criticism, not even from you. Am I understood? The undead man stood there, baffled and mum, before realizing that his former student was right. He was letting his emotions cloud his judgment, and disrespecting the Hokage and his advisors, whatever else they may have been to him in the past. It was difficult to reconcile with that fact. From his point of view, it wasn't even half a week ago that they'd been his students. But it still didn't make his behavior any more or less than that of a spoiled brat. Certainly not of the grown man he actually was, nor of the Hokage he used to be. Sighing, he inclined his head. You're right. I apologize for any disrespect I've given you. I'll try to control myself better from now on. It felt weird and uncomfortable saying to those whom he used to lecture about proper decorum, but Tobirama knew it was the right thing to do. He had set the standards for them. It was only fair he abided by them too. We understand, sensei, Koharu assured him, her voice taking on a gentler quality. We know it must be hard for you to hear all this, but with you here now, we can begin rectifying our failures. Your presence in relation to the boy will grant us some much-needed leeway, loath as I am to admit that it's needed in the first place. If I recall correctly, Kakashi Hatake is his squad leader, Hamura said. We should inform him of the arrangement as soon as the meeting is over. Actually, Hiruzen cut in suddenly, causing the others' gazes to fall on him. Jiraiya informed me that he's taken to training him since last month. It explains how Naruto summoned Gamabunta and harnessed the fox's strength. Tobirama remembered him. Sarutobi had introduced the man as one of his ex-students, and a former teammate of Orochimaru's. A summoner of the empty Mayaboku toads and the village's spymaster, though the toad sage's sense of formality left something to be desired. Nevertheless, the fact his mere presence made that gut feeling the one that all experienced shinobi learned to trust practically screamed danger, assured Tobirama of his skill. Sensei, you won't mind sharing, will you? His strongest former disciple asked, but with a confidence and finality that almost made it seem like an order. As you were trained by both Hashirama and myself, the results speaking for themselves, I suppose I won't mind sharing again. Besides, Jiraiya might have skills that he could teach Naruto that I can't. Excellent. Hiruzen smiled, pleased. Still, Hamura promptly said. What is to be done about Team 7, not to mention Kakashi's two other students, Sakura Harino and Sasuke Uchiha, I believe. The Hokage raised an eyebrow, honestly surprised at him knowing the identity of Naruto's teammates. Actually, no. He really shouldn't have been. This was the team led by one of their strongest jonin, infamous for failing graduates one after another. Sasuke was the last of his clan and the most valuable genin of the Hidden Leaf along with his aforementioned teammate, and Sakura had probably fallen onto his radar simply due to association. Well, since all three of them failed to be promoted, according to the rules, the team should remain as it is, Hiruzen suggested, though that'd leave the obvious problem of Naruto not only having too many teachers but the appearance of being heavily favored, especially since all his mentors would be famous and extremely powerful shinobi. This isn't the sort of situation we're usually faced with, so I don't think we should rely on common practice, Koharu advised. Perhaps Kakashi ought to focus on Sasuke alone. From everything I've seen, comparing him from before the exams to the one after his solo training with Kakashi is like trying to compare your average jonin to a Kage, and leave this Sakura Haruno unattended? Tobirama interjected. While he's had to make more than his fair share of unfair decisions with cold efficiency, leaving a young genin without a sensei when arrangements could be made didn't sit well with him. If Naruto and Sasuke are to receive private tutoring, I believe it would be well within our power to grant this girl a teacher of her own. As was mentioned earlier, we have ninja to spare in spite of the invasion. Hiruzen took a puff from his pipe, looking almost bored. If we're all in agreement with this, then I suggest we let Kakashi choose the most suitable candidate. He knows her skills better than anyone, so there isn't anyone better qualified to do the picking. Danzo inclined his head, concurring with the decision, yes, though Naruto and Sasuke should take priority. Those two have the potential to shape the future of the Hidden Leaf Village. However, the old man narrowed his lone eye. Orochimaru's meddling is concerning. He obviously wants the Sharingan, and is goading young Sasuke with the promise of power. What truly worries me is that the boy's desire for revenge is just the stepping stone he needs. An Uchiha that wanted revenge? How original. Tobirama's mind immediately flashed to Madara, a swell of bitterness and exasperation rising along with it, but he pushed those feelings down. He knew better than to automatically associate the long-dead traitor with a 12-year-old boy still loyal to his village, although that nonetheless begged the question of, on whom does Sasuke Uchiha seek vengeance and why? He asked just as the thought finished. The mood in the office suddenly darkened, causing Tobirama to lift a curious eyebrow. The usually prepared man also felt a twinge of disbelief at the notion that there was even more bad news. He had thought the Uchiha had merely faced the exact same fate as his own clan after failing to sense any Uchiha chakra except for a single source, doubtful as it was with their clan pride and all, but it seemed like Lady Luck was still giving him the cold shoulder. Hiruzen finally spoke after exhaling a small smoke cloud. The Uchiha clan was almost completely wiped out in the course of a single night by one of their own, a ninja by the name of Itachi Uchiha. The man is labeled a traitor and an S-rank criminal, or, at least, that's the official story we fed to the public. The reality of it, however, is much different. Different how? The undead man crossed his arms. Madara's ability to control the Nine Tails is by no means a secret, and with the beast appearing in the middle of the leaf in a cloud of smoke, it narrowed down the options of who to blame the attack on. It certainly didn't body flicker to the middle of the village, he said the last part with a chuckle. Either way, with several testimonies of seeing the Sharingan in its eyes, the clan fell under heavy suspicion, and the shinobi populace began ostracizing them. It snowballed from there, and not long after the Uchiha began plotting a coup d'état to overthrow us. A scowl graced Tobirama's face at the revelation. He didn't need to hear the rest, he could do the math well enough himself. The Uchiha clan's eradication had in actuality been an operation sanctioned by the 4 living people present in the room. He would have done no different. Frankly, he wasn't at all surprised that the Uchiha had decided to plan an insurrection. He'd been fairly sure back when he was still among the living that such a day would come. They had just been too proud, too narrow-minded, and too dark to integrate themselves into the village beyond just the physical sense. The will of fire, the Senju ideal that had truly been responsible for the Hidden Leaf's creation, would have never been fully accepted by them, except for a select few. In his mind, they had always been the number one threat to his home. Their isolation from the rest of the Leaf would have come with or without him establishing the police force, which had forced them to be a neutral party when it came to the village's political affairs. After all, an inside enemy was far more dangerous than any external threat, especially in the ninja world. Hashirama had been too soft and naive to see this, uselessly trying to persuade him to play nice with the, as he was just proven correct, treacherous clan. He'd done the best he could, of course, giving them a job where their unstable emotions would be kept in check, while simultaneously putting a limiter on their strength by keeping them in the village and away from combat-related situations. And it had worked. Nonetheless, he couldn't help but admire one Itachi Uchiha as Hiruzen continued narrating the events from 5 years ago. The willpower and fortitude it had taken to kill off his own clansmen, his parents included, and then deliberately cause his beloved baby brother to hate his guts must have been beyond measure, all for the sake of the village. He might have very well been the truest Leaf ninja ever, and from the clan Tobirama had least expected. Regardless of his personal opinions, he always gave credit where credit was due. He sighed while pinching his nose, feeling like his very soul was tired, which wasn't far from the truth. I think we should wrap this up for now. I want to have a chat with Naruto's sensei, preferably before he wakes up. The doctors told me that they'll be bringing him out of the medically induced coma this afternoon. Actually, there is one more matter that needs to be discussed, and your input would be appreciated, Tobirama sensei, Kohara said before turning to stare at the monkey summoner. Hiruzen, you are strong and wise but also old, too old to be leading this village. We need a new Hokage. If the old man in question was offended, he hid it well beneath the appearance of contemplation. He answered a minute later, I believe you are right. I am hardly fit to lead anymore. Tobirama was inclined to disagree. I beg to differ. For the most part, the Hokage position is a mental exercise. Therefore, your advanced age and experience are a boon, not a shortcoming. In his opinion, the most vital traits of a leader were judicious decision-making, charisma, and emotional control. Power alone didn't grant one the ability to wisely decide what ninja to send to get the best results from a mission, or how to effectively negotiate with other politicians and fellow leaders to promote good relations or make lucrative business deals. Still, people wanted a powerful leader that made them feel safe and comfortable. In the ninja world, the most powerful of them were usually those who had honed their skills, physical or otherwise, through countless battles, and pure muscle without any brains would get a shinobi killed sooner rather than later, which was why the judgment of the strongest shinobi was normally held in high regard by their comrades, which further made them good Kage candidates. True, Hamura admitted. But better we have a wise and strong Hokage who physically exhibits those traits. Or at least, doesn't give the impression that their power is waning. We were just invaded and came out victorious with barely more than a scratch due to nothing less than a stroke of pure luck. He settled his gaze on Tobirama as he said the last part. Our people need the reassurance, and frankly, so do we, for both our present and our future. Which is why we think Jiraiya would be the best option, Kohara finished. In spite of the serious topic, Hiruzen chuckled, drawing the attention of the other occupants. He gave them a somewhat sheepish but amused smile. I apologize, but you're asking for the impossible. Jiraiya will not give up his freedom that easily. You'll sooner convince Kakashi to give up his make-out collection than convince Jiraiya to sit still in one place for the rest of his life. More importantly, the Hidden Leaf Village needs his spy network, now more than ever in the upcoming times of tribulation I feel she'll be facing. He's right, you know, a new voice piped up, causing all of them except for the Hokage to stiffen and direct their attention to the source. The man in question stood there, crouched on the windowsill and smirking at them like he had just won the lottery. Besides, if all of you are so set on a sanin, there is one other. Tobirama hadn't even sensed him, a highly impressive feat in and of itself. As if feeling his gaze, the toad sage turned towards him and kept on smirking in an infuriating manner. Probably on purpose too, from what the reanimated Kage had gleaned about him. Spy Master's trade secret and lord. You know how it is, he said smugly to the renowned censor. Tobirama's eyes narrowed slightly, eventually deciding to be the bigger man by answering with a light-hearted scoff. It was certainly a blow to his pride, however small, but it proved Jiraiya's proficiency at what he did. The corners of Hiruzen's lips tilted upwards at the exchange, while the rest of the elders had tense expressions on their faces. When the sanin noticed, he grinned slightly at them. Come on, guys. Why the long faces? You said that another sanin could take the mantle of Hokage. While there is little doubt regarding her skills, it hardly even matters. She hasn't been seen for over a decade, Danzo responded. She? Tobirama asked. Your grandniece Tsunade, Koharu revealed to him. The man in armor perked up at that, glad to hear of another familiar name, though it was quickly replaced by confusion. Hadn't been seen for over a decade? The way Danzo had phrased it strongly implied that she hadn't gone rogue, nor that she was in hiding. It sounded more like she'd left with their permission but hadn't kept in touch. But why would she leave the village for such a long time, all the while refusing any contact with it? It inspired no confidence whatsoever, and if the bad news kept piling up, Tobirama didn't know how long it would be before his mind broke apart at the seams, followed by his ash and dust body. I'm sure I can smoke her out, one way or another. I'm the last person you'd want wearing the hat and acting all high and mighty. But Tsunade Jiraiya paused a moment for effect. She's got the brains for it, more than a loafer like me. The three elders looked ready to protest, and Tobirama was a bit perplexed at the hint of disdain on Danzo's and Koharu's faces, but all of them stopped and looked to him for some reason. They almost seemed uncomfortable, which he couldn't figure out why, before shifting their looks to Saru. Unfazed by the attention, the Hokage locked his hands in front of his mouth in silent thought, his eyes closed. After a few short moments, they opened and had a decisive gleam to them. Very well. Jiraiya, I'm tasking you with finding and bringing her back. You are to relay this message. The honeymoon is over. She'll know what I mean. The spy master nodded before addressing the Senju in the room. Since we'll be sharing responsibilities for Naruto's training and yeah, I heard everything, I guess you'll be coming, too. I want the kid to tag along for this ride, alright, but I'd like us to go 10 days from now. At their confused looks, he explained, I'll need the time to assess Naruto's skills, get a head start on his training, and sketch out a regimen based on the results. I'd also like the time to get to know him before embarking on an actual mission with the boy. Jiraiya's expression softened as he nodded in agreement. Fair enough. With Sarutobi-sensei still with us, there isn't any real need to rush anyway. You should also know that Kakashi was Minato's student, and he's aware of Naruto's relation to him. Hiruzen then passed his former teacher a folder. When he opened it, he recognized it as a personnel file, which depicted a young man with white, spiky hair not unlike his own, and a mask that covered over half his face. Graduated at the age of 5, promoted to Chunin at the age of 6, became a Jonin at 13. Kakashi was obviously a natural prodigy considering the rate at which he had climbed the hierarchical ladder. The next part surprised him enough that he froze for a few seconds. Put in charge of a Chunin team in order to complete a vital assignment in the Third Shinobi World War, during which one of his teammates had been kidnapped. Kakashi and the remaining Chunin under him, one Obito Uchiha, had decided to undertake a rescue operation. It resulted in the loss of his left eye that was later replaced with the Sharingan of his dying teammate, given willingly. The timely arrival of Minato Namikaze prevented any more deaths on the Hidden Leaf's part. Ever since then, Kakashi's usage of the Sharingan had led to him acquiring the monikers Copy Ninja and Kakashi of the Sharingan. Besides that, his other most notable skill was his mastery of lightning style, as well as his ninjutsu expertise in general, no doubt bolstered by the Uchiha clan's Kekkai Genkai. Seeing the man's address written among his personal details, Tobirama began molding his chakra to body flicker out of the office. However, Jiraiya spoke once more just as he did. "Oh, you should probably work a lot on Naruto's chakra control. He's gonna need it for a special jutsu I want to teach him." Kakashi Hatake was a man of many regrets, who lost many people important to him during his short life, even for shinobi standards. He'd fallen into depression more times than he could count. After acknowledging that point, with no little help from the few of his remaining friends deciding to knock some sense into him, he began finding ways to cope with it all, and what better way than hobbies, like reading adult literature in public. The man was doing just that in the late morning as he walked back home after helping with the reconstruction. Luckily, most of the damage would be repaired within several days, maybe little over a week. That's how lucky they were, taking into account the fact they had been invaded by two different forces, one being another hidden village and the other led by one of the legendary sanin. Kakashi wasn't as surprised as some of the others though, as he had not only heard of the miracle but actually witnessed it as soon as the barrier encasing the Hokage and Orochimaru had gone down. He was embarrassed to admit that he'd stood gaping like a fish for almost a half a minute after seeing his Lord Hokage jump down and join the fray, assisted by the fucking second Hokage. Hell, guy had gotten his bearings back sooner than him, even though it was to immediately wail about their youthful good fortune and some other crap the copy ninja had already forgotten by this point. Well, as he'd learned by now, life was full of disappointments. Granted, the arrival of the reanimated Senju could hardly be classified as a letdown. Reaching his front door and without looking, he put the key in the lock on his first try, still engrossed in the literary work of art. Turning it towards the left, he unlocked the door and entered his humble, somewhat Spartan abode. Just as was about to turn on the lights, he couldn't help but feel that something was off. He lowered his book while discreetly going for a kunai. He promptly stopped, taken aback by the scene. Sitting on one of his chairs was a man in blue armor with a white fur collar over a black full-body suit. Of course, he recognized him immediately. While he knew he should have done something respectful like giving a formal bow, he was so floored he inadvertently did things the usual Kakashi way. Raising his unoccupied hand, he waved in greeting. "Yo." Tobirama Senju's eyebrows went up slightly at the masked ninja's odd attitude. The Hatake wondered if he just phenomenally screwed up any chances of being in the man's good graces. Relief swept through him as he saw his lips twitching upwards in amusement. "Kakashi Hatake, I presume?" The Jonin instantly turned serious, closing his book and putting it on the shelf next to the door. "Yes, sir. I came here to talk to you about one of your students, Naruto Uzumaki." Kakashi's uncovered eye widened in bewilderment. He wondered how his cute, little, knucklehead student might have drawn the legendary man's attention. "Oh? What about him?" "His skills mostly, as well as his mission performance." "May I ask why?" the masked ninja inquired. "I want to train him," Tobirama replied. Though Kakashi had guesses when the undead Hokage had said he wanted to know about Naruto's skill and mission performance, that was still the last thing he had expected. He decided to voice his confusion. "Is there a particular reason why you are interested, Lord Second?" "Yes, though it will be kept a secret at the moment. It was decided between me and Hiruzen that it'll be kept away from the public's ears for the moment, with only a select few allowed to know. Since you're already aware that Naruto is the fourth Hokage's son, you are among those selected." Tobirama paused for a moment. "Naruto Uzumaki is my great-grandson." If he was shocked before, now he was frozen in his spot without finding the ability to move of any of his muscles, almost as if the whole world had gone still. After half a minute of staring all wide-eyed, he finally regained enough composure to say a single word. "Oh." Tobirama just looked at him in a way that made Kakashi think he was making fun of him. Rude much, not that he was dumb enough to actually say it to the freaking second Hokage. Putting his chin in his right hand, he thought of the best way to phrase his assessment of Minato's son. After all, Naruto's mannerisms and attitude were far from exemplary, and, as stupid and nonsensical as it sounded, he didn't want to hurt the second Hokage's feelings. Neither did he want to make his student seem like a hopeless case, which he definitely wasn't. his most recent victories being proof enough. Well, I can safely say that Naruto has more potential than he has talent, Kakashi said carefully. Still, it's hard to evaluate his natural aptitude for the ninja arts considering his sabotaged education. Lord Hokage informed of it after I was assigned to Team 7, Tobirama grimaced, anger and bitterness overtaking his features for a second. Yes, Sara has informed me of the circumstances of Naruto's childhood. With such a shoddy foundation, there were a lot of things I had to teach him that he should have known by the time he graduated. The most obvious was his overall lack of finesse in virtually all of his skills. Oddly enough, despite his big mouth, the only thing he excelled at was subterfuge and traps. Nonetheless, he was physically among the better ones in his class. I imagine so. The Uzumaki's powerful life force granted them many advantages. Sturdier bodies was just one of those, the undead Kage elaborated. It's more than just strength and stamina. As an academy student, he could lead Chunin on a chase across the village after playing one of his pranks. He got away with it almost half the time. Tobirama actually chuckled at that piece of information. Hiruzen hadn't told him about this. So, he's got speed and agility too, but the problem is he lacks the know-how and patience to make it efficient in direct combat. Basically, he has power but little control, Tobirama concluded, feeling a tinge of relief. He could work with that, something like that. Admittedly, he's gotten a lot better since then, so it isn't as much of a problem anymore. Still, his fundamentals need work, especially his chakra control. If he can master that, with his energy reserves he'd be a ninjutsu powerhouse, the Jonin finished. Tobirama nodded, as is the most common case with Senju and Uzumaki. Yeah, but most ninjutsu specialists are mid to long-range fighters. From training and observing Naruto, it was easy to see that he was a short-range fighter by nature, Kakashi commented. Not surprising, really. Both his parents were best at short range too, so taijutsu is something to pay attention to, Tobirama deduced, Kakashi inclining his head in agreement. His physical skills would complement it well. Even so, ninjutsu can be used at all ranges, and even if he is at his best in close quarters, it doesn't mean he can't be trained to fight efficiently at all distances, Kakashi nodded. He himself was an example. He might have been a mid to long-range combatant in most cases, but that didn't mean his taijutsu and melee combat skills were to be taken lightly. He could cross blades and trade blows with the best of them. That reminded him. I believe his taijutsu lessons were sabotaged even after Irika Yumino was assigned to their class. The one in charge of hand-to-hand combat training was Mizuki, who was biased against him, the copy ninja revealed. When Naruto had failed the graduation exam several months ago, Mizuki told him he could pass if he stole the Forbidden Scroll and learned a jutsu from it. Naruto was desperate, not to mention taught to trust his teachers, even if he doesn't always respect them. Tobirama grunted in understanding. And I assume that the technique he learned was my shadow clone jutsu. Kakashi I smiled, sort of. It was actually the A-ranked version of it. It took him less than an hour. Tobirama smirked in pride. If nothing else, that right there was proof of the latent talent his great-grandson had. I've managed to work out a fair amount of kinks in his taijutsu, plus physical training. I've also taught him the shadow shuriken jutsu and the earth style, headhunter jutsu, in addition to some tactics and misdirection, to which he took like a fish to water. Kakashi continued with the evaluation. Still, it's during his spars that I saw his aptitude for short-range combat. Initially, he's average at best. But after a little while, as his body gets warmed up and instincts and reflexes take over, there's this shift that takes place. He gets more graceful, performs feats of speed and coordination that he usually isn't capable of, and doesn't get hit as much. I'd go as far as to say that his instincts for close-range combat are even better than his father's. The former Hokage rolled that thought around in his head for a short while, eventually nodding in satisfaction. Any more advice? Things I should know about? Kakashi silently contemplated before answering. Naruto learns best by doing things instead of learning the theory behind it. Give him some proper guidance, let him learn through his body, and I guarantee he'll surprise you. That sounded a lot like Hashirama, and his brother didn't know whether to be glad or dismayed that Naruto inherited from him too. In the end, though, Hashirama had, very obviously, been the stronger one between them, so he supposed he ought not to worry about it. What about his mission performance? He asked. Kakashi shifted in his spot, looking almost awkward. This was the part he'd been dreading the most. Well, you could say his personality and performance overlap a lot. Naruto didn't know where he was, nor the time of day. Kinda hard to determine when his eyelids felt like they weighed 20 times their usual weight. His body was faring better, just barely, as if every side of him was encased in a block of cement. Thankfully, he felt the heaviness slowly leaving him. His fingers twitched first, then his brow furrowed, followed by the rest of his body getting used to the sensation of movement. He could at least tell that he was in a bed. Finally, he opened his eyes, only to immediately shut them at the assault of light. Man, he must have been out of it for a while if his eyes were so damn sensitive. He didn't even get to see where he was. All of a sudden, memories of his last moments of consciousness invaded his mind. He remembered the Chunin exams, the invasion, and that idiot Sasuke going after Gaara all on his own. Gaara. With that name came the image of a red-haired kid his age, after which it twisted into a grotesque form of a monster, its shell made completely of sand. It scared him badly. He remembered getting pummeled by it, and then himself pummeling it back with his shadow clones. He was eager, no, desperate to beat it, and it had nothing to do with self-preservation. Sand. Sand everywhere. All around him, squeezing him. Trapping someone. Someone important, a pink-haired girl. In less than a second, his eyes were wide open in alarm, and he'd shot upwards in his bed. Sakura! A hand grabbed the boy's right shoulder, causing wild, panicked eyes to turn towards the person next to him. Mr. Uzumaki. Please calm down, and take deep breaths. Everything's alright. Calm down. How could he calm down when that monster was getting ready to squash his teammate into a bloody paste? Naruto was just about ready to voice his outrage when that same person interrupted him. Sakura Haruno is okay, Mr. Uzumaki. There's nothing to worry about, she insisted, his mind finally registering their gender. Following her previous advice, he started taking deep breaths, willing himself to simmer down. Feeling composed enough to talk normal, he again glanced up at the woman, blushing promptly in embarrassment. He spluttered clumsily for an apology. Mississippi Chiyuku. I'm really sorry. It's quite alright, no harm done. Namuri Chiyuku smiled gently down at him. She was his doctor whenever he was in the Hidden Leaves Hospital, being one of the few people who didn't hate him for the Nine-Tails attack. Not that he'd known that the first time the old man had assigned her to treat him for breaking his arm after trying to climb a tree. Looking around, he noticed the perpetual whiteness attributed to the village's main medical facility. He himself was wearing the usual hospital garb. How do you feel, Mr. Uzumaki? His doctor asked patiently. Testing his extremities, he found he was way better than earlier. He grinned. Thank God for accelerated healing rates. Pretty good actually, but I'm also pretty hungry. Understandable. You've been unconscious for 2 days. The genin stared at her in surprise. She giggled lightly at his shocked expression. You would have woken up sooner had I not put you in a coma. Your body needed to heal, and from what I know of you, you wouldn't have sat still even if Lord Hokage told you to. Now I'll do a few short tests to take in your condition. He followed her instructions, doing whatever she told him to and truthfully answering whenever she asked him to tell her if he felt pain or discomfort. Not 10 minutes later they were done. So how am I doing? Very well. In fact, you can start training tomorrow. He sighed in relief, his troubles assuaged knowing that everyone was fine and he could continue training the next day. Maybe he could get Kakashi to teach him that Chidori thing. It looked so awesome. The boy was so deep in his thoughts, he missed Namuri going towards the wall to his left. When he noticed her new position, he took note of a small seal formula on the wall. He stared at it in confusion before looking at the doctor for clarification. She smiled at him. A very special person wishes to see you. He left this seal on the wall and said for one of the staff to infuse a bit of chakra into it when you were up and about. He stared at her, even more confused. A special person wanted to see him. A bit of warmth filled him, but that feeling was drowned out by curiosity. Outside of his team and the old man, who the heck wanted to see him? She stepped back after putting a bit of chakra into the formula, and a few short seconds later, a new person appeared out of thin air. Naruto jumped at the sudden arrival. His ninja training also kicking in, his hand reached for the pouch he normally wore on his hip, only to find it missing. He mentally slapped his forehead for forgetting he was in hospital robes. And besides, it wasn't like Mississippi Chiyuka would invite someone who wanted to hurt him. The blonde stared at the man in blue armor with white hair that reminded him of Kakashi Sensei and Pervy Sage. Maybe he was a relative of one of them. However, as he kept gazing at the male adult, he couldn't help but find him familiar for some reason. The man turned towards the last occupant of the room and bowed his head a bit. Thank you for contacting me. If I may, I'd like to have a moment alone with him. There's no need, Lord. He's perfectly healthy, he can be discharged today. You may use this room to converse though. With a bow of her own, which Naruto noticed was much deeper than his, she left the room. It left the two of them to gaze at one another, one emotionless and the other staring simply because he didn't know what else to do. The white-haired adult was the one to break the silence. Congratulations on your victory against Shikaku. I heard it was a great battle. Naruto smiled at the praise, but still remained a little suspicious. Thanks. Not like I had many options with, it being either myself or the village. A very impressive accomplishment regardless. A blush adorned his cheeks, and he tried to steer the conversation in another direction. Who are you? Have we met before? You look sorta familiar. The man smirked, his amusement palpable. I should think so. You do see my face on most days. Really? Naruto's eyebrows went up. I think I'd recognize you if I saw you almost every day. He kept smirking, which started to annoy the blonde. I never said you see me almost every day. I said you see my face almost every day. The young ninja furrowed his brow in bewilderment. His face? The hell did he mean by that? The only faces he saw on an almost daily basis were the ones on the Hokage manu. For the second time that day, his eyes shot wide open. After taking in the man's features more closely, he jumped from his bed and went towards the window to look at the mountain behind the Hokage's office. As his eyes landed on a particular face, He recognized the identity of the man in his hospital room. He pointed a shaking finger at him. "You're a ghost?" Naruto was just about ready to shit his pants in fright, made even worse when the dead man dropped the smirk and gave him a stony glare, looking ready to take over his soul or some shit. Oh man, this was not the way he wanted to go. He thought he would at least live long enough to kiss a girl, hopefully Sakura, but without, of course, the backlash of being clobbered to within an inch of his life for it. As the spirit of the second Hokage opened its mouth, he prepared himself for the incantation that would spell his doom. "I am not a ghost, Naruto Uzumaki, and don't refer to me as such again." Naruto stared at the man in surprise, seeing a deadpan expression on his face instead of the earlier glare. "I am a reanimation. I was brought back with a jutsu of my own creation by Orochimaru, the rogue ninja that is responsible for the invasion 2 days ago." Orochimaru. He remembered that name. Sakura had told him it was the name of that snake lady from the hidden grass that they'd fought, except it seemed that she was actually a he. And now, that same guy was responsible for attacking the leaf. From the sound of it, this Orochimaru had also somehow duped the sand into joining him. Wait a minute! If that was true then, if he's the one that brought you back, how do I know you're not really on his side? How do I know he ain't the one pulling your strings? He demanded, as suspicious as he was indignant. Attacking his village was bad enough, but using one of its former leaders to do it, this guy deserved an A-grade ass-whoopin' and a one-way ticket to the afterlife, preferably the dark one with demons and fiery pits. The smirk came back, but this one that looked almost proud. "Using your brain, I see." A good question, and one with a simple answer. "As I said before, reanimation is my jutsu, which means I know its workings inside and out, including how to counteract it. Orochimaru's original idea was to use not only me but also my brother, the first Hokage, to fight the current one. Fortunately, I managed to break his connection with both of our souls, after which Hiruzen and I forced him to abort the invasion." Naruto exhaled and smiled in relief. The old man was alright, and now he knew that it was okay to trust the dead man. After all, old man Kage had regaled him a few tales of Tobirama Senju's exploits and teachings. It was obvious just how much he respected his late sensei, and how much sadness his sacrifice had caused him. Nevertheless, that still left the question of why the Senju wanted to see him. Maybe he recognized his awesome skills? He did congratulate him for winning against Gaara. "Why are you here?" Wincing at how rude he sounded, he quickly rephrased his question. Is there a reason you wanted to see me, sir?" While the blonde genin was fully aware his politesse and social graces were a work in progress, Kakashi-sensei and the old man did manage to pound some semblance of them into his head. Plus, the guy in front of him was the friggin' second Hokage. The real deal. The Hidden Leaf Village's big enchilada once upon a time. He did him no justice by acting like an immature brat. Tobirama's visage turned serious, but Naruto could swear that there was also a hint of warmth in its cool austerity. "I'm here because you are my one and only descendant. You, Naruto Uzumaki, are my great-grandson. I'm here because you are my one and only descendant. You, Naruto Uzumaki, are my great-grandson." Naruto's mind froze when the second Hokage uttered those words. On the inside, however, his thoughts and emotions were running around uncontrollably like headless chickens. It was hard to tell what he truly felt. Ever since he could remember, he'd always craved for a family, had always wanted to know who his parents were. The old man told him they had died in Ninetale's attack, though the blonde did wonder if he had lied to spare him the sorrow and disappointment. He had always considered the option that his parents hadn't wanted him and had just left him on someone's doorstep. Maybe his parents had done something awful and left him to fend for himself. It had been as good an explanation as any as to why the villagers glared at him all the time and pulled their children away when he got too close. Secretly, despite the Hokage's assurances to the contrary, it had seemed the most likely option, until Mizuki-sensei had gone and let the cat out of the bag. The revelation had scared him at first, but it had given him closure as well. Ignorance was bliss his ass. Knowing the horrible truth was better than being left in the dark. The old man told him that the fourth Hokage had wanted everyone to treat him like a hero for keeping the almighty beast caged, sacrificing the life of a normal person for the safety of the village, regardless of whether he had a choice or not. He felt somewhat honored that the Yellow Flash had chosen him, but also believed he'd just been born in the wrong place at the wrong time. Old man Sarutobi told him differently though. If the safety of the village was to be considered paramount, which all shinobi of the leaf should do, not that it changed things much. He was still treated like shit by the majority of citizens, though the headband that represented him as a shinobi of the Hidden Leaf did help a bit. But now, right in front of him, stood a legendary ninja who claimed to be his great-grandfather. A Hokage no less. Frankly, it was too incredible for the cynical part of his mind to believe. "Why, you're kidding, right? This just a practical joke," he mumbled shakily, standing up from his bed. Tobirama crossed his arms but understood well his skepticism. Pushing a bit of chakra into a miniature storage seal on his shoulder armor, a document appeared in a poof of smoke, which he then handed to the still flabbergasted young ninja. Naruto took them, his hands shaking a bit, and slowly started reading. After about a minute rereading the document several times, tears started forming in his eyes. It was difficult to determine if it was out of joy, or overwhelming disbelief, or a mixture of a whole myriad of emotions, but in the piece of paper he was holding was the evidence of his relation to the second Hokage, brought back to life by Orochimaru. A part of him didn't know whether to thank the snake fucker or continue cursing him for attacking the leaf. So burdened by the onslaught, he felt the strength in his legs leave him. The blonde boy sat back down on his bed, just staring at the certificate, his mind numb to the rest of the world. Tobirama waited patiently, knowing it was best to let him gather his thoughts and answer first. After a couple of minutes, Naruto finally spoke. The old man he knew all along? Yes. No sense in keeping it from him. Doubtless, Naruto had already figured out that the document had come from Saru, since he himself had died long before his birth to have known that the Uzumaki genin was his progeny. Trying to lie to him now would only make the sense of betrayal worse. Why? Naruto asked, shock visibly turning into anger as his face contorted into a scowl. Why would he keep this from me? I asked him about my family so many times, but he always told me the same thing. He lied? The old man would just give me this speech about how my parents died in the Ninetales attack, but he never told me who they were. I still don't know their names, or what they were like, or even if they were ninja at all. He yelled. Granted, he'd assumed they had been because the Hokage had always used a tone that suggested that he'd known them well, but didn't want to tell him, who, by all rights, should have been allowed to know before anyone else. He might as well have. Oh, really? Naruto looked up at the zombified Kage, wide-eyed at the unsympathetic tone. Tobirama sighed and sat down on a chair in front of him, though he kept the stern look. Don't jump to conclusions and make the call that Hiruzen didn't have good enough reasons for the things he did. The boy's mouth opened and closed a few times, finding it hard to formulate an argument in his incredulity. But do you really think you're the first person he's withheld information from for the sake of the village's security? Do you really think my brother and I haven't done the same thing for the same reasons? So basically you're telling me that the Hokage lies to his own citizens? He asked, feeling umbrage at the Hokages, the people he most admired and wanted to be like, doing such a corrupt thing. As ninjas, the decisions we make aren't based on fairness or honor, but on circumstances. We do what is best, not what is right. Yes, I imagine Hiruzen has had to lie a few times, but that is not the same as keeping you in the dark. He didn't try to make you believe that your parents were a certain kind of people, did he? Tobirama said. No. No, he hadn't, but Naruto couldn't see that much of a difference. He hadn't known anything, and he'd suffered for it. Bad enough the old man had kept his mouth shut like a triggered bear trap about his parents, but had also kept him from knowing that an ancestor of his was an actual Hokage, the one thing that would have shed a ray of light and hope on his dark days from childhood, the one thing that would have given him reassurance that his dream of becoming the Hokage wasn't a wasted effort. He heard his great-grandfather sigh again, paying it little heed. I see you remain unconvinced. You should talk to Saru about this if you want to know more, but I'm telling you right now, both as your family and a Kage, that I agree with his decision, for both your and the village's sake. Furrowing his brow, Naruto glanced up at him questioningly. I don't get it. How could have all this been for my sake, and the heck does the village have to do with it? For one, I had enemies back when I was alive, and even though none of them are likely to be in any better state than myself, their animosity could have been passed down in their families. Furthermore, if the other villages had found out about our relation, they would have targeted you to hurt the leaf by extension. Talent for the ninja arts is in our blood, after all. Naruto huffed in irritation and disbelief. Talent. The other villages wouldn't have had to bother. Whatever bravado he might have shown for everyone to see and hear, the blonde was fully aware he was the furthest thing from a prodigy. He was the dead last and, as Sasuke liked to call him, a loser. A sudden burst of pride crept up his spine as he remembered his victories against Neji and Gaara. Even better, he beat them both on the same day, one after another. He couldn't wait to rub it in the noses of all the naysayers, especially Sasuke. Still, that was beside the point in the current discussion. Tobirama continuing his lecture reminded him of that. I know you must have gone through a lot of pain in your life, Naruto, but there are worse fates. Naruto looked away from him, feeling a shiver of dread course through his body at the idea. Alright, that sounds pretty bad, but what about my parents? Why be all hush-hush about them? The second Hokage graced him with a heavy look. That's because your parents had enemies too. Worse, enemies that are alive and well. At the boy's confused expression, he pointed at the document. Take a look at your father's name. I've heard he's someone you admire a great deal. Naruto stared down at the paper, his eyes trained on the spot where his father's name was located, and his body froze without warning. There, where the identity of his male parent was displayed, was a name he recognized all too well. Minato Namikaze, aka the Yellow Flash of the Leaf, aka the fourth Hokage, aka his hero. Getting up from his bed, Naruto walked over to the window and stared up at the Hokage monument. Now that he thought about it, it had been so obvious. Same blonde hair with uncontrollable messiness, the same blue eyes, and most importantly, dead, like the old man Sarutobi had said his parents were. The hero that had sacrificed his life to save his village by sealing the force of nature that was the nine-tailed fox into his own son. Tobirama watched with almost nonchalant detachment as his descendant let out a roar of rage and despair and smashed a fist into the wall on the window's right, embedding it in and causing cracks to spread about half a meter from the point of impact, pieces of it closest to Naruto's fist protruding a bit. He was unperturbed by the reaction, having expected something like this to occur, and even encouraged it in a way. With the funds in the Senju account, it would be easy to pay for the damage, which was nothing compared to the damage had Naruto decided to bottle everything up. As such, he was simultaneously relieved and saddened to watch his great-grandson start to sob and fall down to his knees, his body shaking with unimaginable grief and pain. The man got up from his seat and walked towards the crying boy, picking him up from the ground and carrying him back to the cot. He was honestly used to this, with both his brothers having openly mourned the deaths of their family members, not to mention having experienced the grief himself, though he'd been much more composed about it. However, when Naruto latched onto him, he was reminded it was that very quality that made him far from being the most suitable person to console and comfort others. It wasn't very like him at all. Tobirama Senju was a blunt and unapologetically candid bastard, as he had often been called. Nevertheless, he didn't want to scar the boy for life. The recent revelations and their profession would do a good enough job of that. So, he let Naruto hold onto his cuirass, while he patted the blonde's back a few times. Why? He sobbed, though he'd quietened quite a bit, sniffling more than anything. Why is all of this happening to me? Why does it feel like even those who are closest to me can't do anything but make my life even more miserable? When Naruto phrased it like that, it really did seem like even his family was making his existence worse. His parents, Saru, Jiraiya, Kakashi, all of them, as family members or the closest thing to it, had betrayed him in a sense, even if it was by simply keeping away. Tobirama couldn't make him feel better. The only thing he could do was try and make him understand. A lot of people ask themselves that, both those who have suffered less than you, and those who have suffered more. I can't give you an answer to that. You were dealt a bad hand in life, and it must have hurt Minato like nothing else had ever hurt him before when he realized that he had to seal the nine tails into you. Had to? Naruto asked, looking like he didn't know whether to feel better or worse about that fact. Tobirama nodded. Tailed beasts are masses of chakra given consciousness and physical form. They can't die, and their chakra would just reform if their bodies were destroyed somehow. The blonde genin's eyes widened in astonishment, obviously unaware of that before now. Minato was the Hokage. The village had to come first, and he couldn't call himself that if he was unprepared to make sacrifices he would demand of those under him, the undead Kage said seriously. Asking another to hold the nine tails was out of the question, especially asking parents to give away their child. And besides, not everyone can be a vessel to a creature with such formidable power. Your heritage, on the other hand, means that you can. Naruto's gaze traveled downwards, resignation settling in as he came to realize that his father really had no other choice. It didn't make him feel all that much better, but it was something. Again, better a horrible truth than pain without reason. He rubbed at his eyes and cheeks, wiping the tears away while leaning against his grandfather's chest. He might have just met the guy, and though he wasn't all that family-friendly, his presence and the very fact he was answering his questions granted Naruto a sense of peace within the maelstrom of turmoil. Sorry, I got your armor wet, and I punched that hole in the wall. Both of those can be easily taken care of, don't worry about it. Anyway, there's another reason I came here, Tobirama said, standing up and facing his descendant. As my heir, I'll be training you in the art of being a shinobi. Naruto's eyes widened before grinning. To be trained by a Hokage was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Really? What about Kakashi-sensei and my team? For the time being, your team will be officially disbanded. Each of you will be trained separately by a private tutor. Jiraiya and I will focus on you, Kakashi will train Sasuke, and your other teammate will have her own mentor. Naruto crossed his arms and pouted. Figures that Kakashi would train Sasuke. He is his favorite, after all. Tobirama lifted an unimpressed eyebrow. Considering you'll be taught by a Hokage and one of the legendary sanin, you don't really have room to talk, Naruto. He then narrowed his eyes in a way that frightened the blonde a little. Not to mention, such an attitude is unbecoming of a ninja. Petty emotions will only blind your judgment. Don't make the same mistake with Kakashi that you made with Saru. But, if you're talking about the Chunin exams, I already know about that. Think it through. He couldn't train you together since there was a chance that you would fight each other. With Sasuke having the Sharingan, Kakashi was more compatible with him than with you. Another reason is if he had to focus on the both of you, either of you would have advanced your skills the necessary amount in 1 month's time, he concluded. Its seeming unfairness aside, Tobirama agreed it had been the more practical decision. Naruto tried to find a flaw in the man's logic but only came up with one. Yeah, but he gave me the closet pervert. That man was pathetic. According to Kakashi, Mr. Ebisu gained the rank of special jonin because of his teaching skills. A man with quirks and eccentricities, yes, but just as shrewd and perceptive. Appearances are of little importance in the ninja world. We must always look underneath the underneath. Naruto tried to argue, but in the end just looked down in shame and nodded in acceptance. Still sucks though. The point I'm trying to make is that you shouldn't jump to conclusions, Naruto. The second Hokage's tone softened as he spoke, seeing that the boy was beginning to understand and accept. Reserve judgment, no matter what you'd like to believe, because you'll never be certain of anything until you get all the facts. If you don't, you'll make uninformed decisions and act on impulses and conclusions that are most likely wrong. The Uzumaki's expression turned sheepish, but with a tinge of understanding mixed in. Basically, assumptions make an ass out of you and me, his great-grandfather actually snorted amusedly. As vulgar as it is appropriate, I suppose. You should know that Kakashi has far more faith in you than you might think. He might not have been able to train you as much as you would have liked, but he believes in the potential you possess. Naruto chuckled along, feeling lighter than before, like he'd been carrying a backpack loaded with a dozen of bushy-browed leg weights. Grandpa Tobirama was right. He misjudged Kakashi just as he'd probably misjudged a whole lot of other people, including the old man. He would talk to him later, and like his grandfather had said, he would get all the facts before coming to a conclusion. Now, Tobirama suddenly exclaimed, effectively getting Naruto's attention. If we're done with all the sentimental claptrap, are you ready to begin your training? The blonde looked at him blankly for a few seconds before jumping out of bed, excited. Hell yeah! Just let me get my clothes on. He opened the cabinet next to his bed, but instead of finding his orange jumpsuit, he found a different set. He turned towards Tobirama with a questioning look. Where are my clothes? Those are your clothes. Naruto opened his mouth to protest, but Tobirama cut him off. No arguments. Your clothes were too bright and would have easily given your position away in any stealth-based situation. I chose these clothes because they are better suited for blending in. When he had found the jumpsuit that his great-grandson usually wore, he had been flat-out horrified. How had he survived this long with that abomination on him? In the ninja world, it was practically asking for an enemy to kill you from a distance. But that was when it had hit him. The fact it stood out so painfully much was the very reason he'd been wearing it. Tobirama figured that he wore it to help him get the attention he lacked from other people. But with the clothes he bought Naruto, he would be killing two birds with one stone. His grandson would remain alive for at least a little while longer, and ditching the orange jumpsuit could partially help him get over some of his attention-seeking issues. Of course, there was always the fact that Naruto simply liked that ghastly shade of orange, a fact the undead man wasn't yet ready to resign himself to. Stop procrastinating and put them on, Tobirama ordered firmly when he saw the hesitation in Naruto's eyes and movements. The genin obeyed and hurried in putting the new set of clothes on. When finished, he created a shadow clone to appraise his new look. He wore black, ANBU-style pants with taped shins, a navy blue, skin-tight t-shirt with a short-sleeved mesh shirt underneath, black sandals and tape around his forearms with silver steel bracers over the upper part, and two blue straps over the underside. He kept the same blue hidden leaf headband that Irika had given him. All in all, he looked like a real ninja. The young shinobi grinned and turned towards his great-grandfather. If you'd been trying to win me over with gifts, you would have been off to a really great start. Tobirama just huffed with a small smirk. We'll see about that when we begin with your training. We've spent enough time in here as it is. Before that, I need to let the hospital staff know about the brand new hole you left in their wall. Naruto just rubbed the back of his head bashfully in response. Kakashi was in a bit of a bind. He had been thinking long and hard on who to assign to be Sakura's mentor. There were plenty of skilled shinobi in the Hidden Leaf, but not much, if any, that could train her well enough not to fall behind her teammates. It was made difficult by the fact that Sakura didn't have a field in which she seemed to particularly excel. Her excellent chakra control and high intelligence obviously meant that she was best suited for genjutsu and medical jutsu, but therein lied the problem. Apart from Kurenai, who had her own team to train, there were few in the village who specialized in genjutsu, and most of those who did tended to fall behind in other fields, since it was quite a demanding branch of ninja arts for even those who had a knack for it. And while the medical corps would be good for basics and a bit more, they'd demand too much of her time to focus on anything else. And frankly, he was sure Sakura wouldn't accept anything other than being able to stand back-to-back with her teammates as they engaged in combat. More than that, he never agreed with the concept of sending over-specialized ninja out in the field. Too many glaring weaknesses that the enemy would be beyond eager to exploit. Besides, a ninja shouldn't slack off in other departments just because they had already found a forte, or because they were average at them. However, the recent system appeared to encourage it. Specialization was easier than becoming a jack of all trades, and he guessed that the bigwigs just didn't want to waste potential in numbers. He still didn't think it was a good reason. Niji Hyuga, Ino Yamanaka, Shino Aburame, their exceptional talent in their respective clans' jutsus might give them an edge against their fellow genin and a few greenhorn chunin, but when the promotions started coming along and high-level enemy shinobi came knocking in the future, they would find themselves woefully lacking. Sure, their teams could provide cover for their weaknesses, and Kakashi Hatake, of all people, was all for teamwork, but life liked to throw people, ninjas in particular, all sorts of curveballs. They wouldn't always have the luxury of facing their enemies with comrades backing them up, or even facing them with comrades whose skills were compatible with their own. On a mission, there was always the risk of all hell breaking loose, but dealing with it and adapting was also part of their job. If and when these overspecialized wells of superior talent found themselves confronting such a hell with few options available to aid them, simply put, all that talent wouldn't have been worth shit. Not in the long run. Granted, he knew not everyone was a genius like himself, Itachi, or Orochimaru. Achieving outstanding skill in more than one branch wasn't an easy process, and not everyone had the potential for it. He didn't know if Sakura was one of those. Nevertheless, she was in desperate need of taijutsu and physical training, what with her lacking stamina, speed, and close combat prowess. A weapon wouldn't be a bad idea either. Her teacher would need to be able to cover all that and more. Thankfully, she had expressed a desire to grow stronger lately. Not directly, but he could see how she felt inadequate recently, often followed by a determined look. But it wasn't enough. She needed someone who could instill the proper shinobi mindset into her. Dieting and taking care of one's hair weren't exactly common topics among trained kunoichi, except if the kunoichi were trying to infiltrate an enemy base or village. He had eventually settled for one who was, perhaps, the most suitable candidate by far. He discarded them initially, however, as the likelihood of them accepting a student was almost as great as Naruto abstaining from ramen for a week. Plus, the person in question was, putting it mildly, intense. He wanted his cute, little genin well-trained, not psychologically disfigured, hence the bind. However, he was pretty desperate himself. And so, steeling his resolve, he knocked on the person's door. After hearing some shuffling inside, a female voice answered, "Who is it?" "Kakashi, your book buddy." She opened the door and looked at him in slight surprise, though Kakashi noticed that she had one hand behind her back, probably holding a kunai. Smart, even if he had given her his personal code. After checking if it was indeed her colleague, the kunoichi grinned. "Well, ain't this a surprise? What can little old Anko do for ya?" Reaching their destination after having left the hospital and eaten a short lunch, Naruto found himself in his team's training grounds, the same one where he had taken his true genin test along with his teammates. A wave of nostalgia washed over him at the reminder, despite the embarrassing situations he'd been put in. A cough brought him back down to earth, his gaze turning to meet Tobirama's stern expression. He chuckled sheepishly. Sorry. Just reminiscing. Reminisce in your own time. Don't forget, we're here to train. During training, I will be your teacher first and foremost, not your friend or your family. So you understand?" Tobirama said in a strict tone. The blonde felt his body involuntarily straighten, and he quickly nodded to show his acquiescence. The second Hokage then reached into his pouch and pulled out 2 pieces of paper, one small and blank and the other one being bigger with various symbols and kanji written on it. "First thing you need to understand is that hard work alone isn't enough to become a strong ninja. Performing a pointless exercise is a waste of time, no matter how much effort you put into it," he explained. "That's why teachers exist, to provide guidance and direction in the next generation's development. For today, we're going to skip physical training and focus on theory." Naruto's brow lowered in disappointment. Theory? He thought they start with the cool stuff, not some elementary crap. Come on. Really? Dr. Chiyoku advised us to avoid putting any strain on your body. I know the academic side of our profession isn't your strong suit, but there are some things you simply must know in both body and mind. For instance, chakra. What can you tell me about chakra? Tobirama asked, his lecture mode on. I know it's a combination of physical and mental energy, one from the body and the other from the mind. Mesh those two together, and you get chakra, Naruto finished, a proud smirk adorning his face. Yeah, Sakura likes to lecture me a whole lot. I guess some things just stuck, you know. Correct. We can use chakra for many things we wouldn't be able to do otherwise, most commonly to perform jutsu. However, no one's chakra is exactly the same as someone else's. Each person's has its own qualities. For example, in the case of Tsunade Senju of the sanin, her chakra has had a passive but strong effect on her muscle fibers since a very young age, granting them durability and strength that is far beyond ordinary, increasing even further as she trained. Naruto frowned as tried to make sense of his words. So, what you're saying is she's super strong? Yes. On a smaller scale, chakra has that effect on the bones and muscles of all ninja as they grow and train, allowing them to go beyond the physical limits of the untrained civilians, and grow stronger at accelerated rates. Tobirama waited for the boy to nod before continuing. Don't get the wrong idea, though, that we need chakra to perform these advanced feats of strength and coordination. Our muscles and bones don't suddenly lose all their hard-earned fortitude if we're drained of it. The same goes for muscle memory. But when I'm out of chakra, I'm so weak I can't stand, Naruto argued. That's because of a side effect that we experience from chakra exhaustion, which is the loss of stamina. Little chakra means little stamina, meaning our body doesn't have the energy to utilize our muscles to perform strenuous, physical activity. He shrugged. True, we can further increase our strength and speed for a short time with chakra, but that takes focus and energy. Most experienced ninja only do that when they have little choice or are sure that their blows are going to land. Taijutsu is a favored art among shinobi because it doesn't require chakra, and training your body is more straightforward than training your mind and concentration. That made sense. He remembered Lee, who couldn't mold chakra to save his life. His strikes carried the power to smash boulders, and he was a fast fucker. And if by some miracle he'd suddenly gained the ability to do ninjutsu and genjutsu, he'd still fail because his chakra control was even shittier than Naruto's. Bushy Brow's training consisted solely of taijutsu and intense physical workouts, as evidenced by the scarring he had seen on the guy's hands. Lee certainly didn't have the skill to constantly focus chakra to his limbs during a fight, especially not at the speed he fought, but all his physical prowess was still there. However, it did seem that chakra had this same effect on his muscles that Grandpa Tobirama spoke of, seeing just how strong and fast his training had made him. Tobirama held out the 2 pieces of paper for Naruto to take. What do you know about elemental ninjutsu? The Uzumaki held both papers in his left hand while scratching his head with his free one. Well, I've seen Sasuke use those fireballs of his and that lightning jutsu. Zabuza had knocked us around a lot with his water-style jutsu, and this girl from the hidden sand likes to use wind-like attacks. Tobirama frowned a bit at the crude answer but still nodded. There are 5 main elements that all shinobi utilize. They are fire, water, earth, lightning, and wind. Each of them has an element that they are superior to and one which they are inferior to. For example, fire is weak against water for obvious reasons, but is strong against wind since wind just fans the flames. He took a kunai and started drawing on the ground. When he was done, Naruto saw that he drew the kanji for the 5 elements connected together with arrows that went into a clockwise circular motion. Tobirama pointed to the kanji for fire. As you can see, to its left is water, that fire is inferior to, and to its right is wind, to which it is superior. The same goes for the other elements in the drawing. His great-grandfather elaborated as the young ninja stared at it in order to memorize the pattern, which took him about a minute. There are kekei genkai that are produced through a combination of 2 of these elements. Kakashi told me that you encountered an ice-style user on your first mission outside of the village. Naruto nodded. Ice-style is created by merging water and wind chakra, which also meant that this Haku had the primary affinities for those 2 elements. Primary affinities? The blonde asked confusedly. Each person has an element, or elements which they are more attuned to. Most people have a single primary affinity, with 1 or 2 secondary ones. While it is less common for a person without a nature combination kekei genkai to have 2 main affinities, it's either rare nor unheard of. I personally have the primary affinity for water, and 3 secondary affinities for fire, earth, and lightning. Really? Cool! Naruto exclaimed at his ancestors' awesomeness. Settle down and don't interrupt. Naruto promptly shut his mouth at Tobirama's firm order. Anyway, the pieces of paper I gave you will help us determine your affinities. This one, he tapped the blank paper, will tell what is or are your primary affinities, and the other one is a special seal I made that bypasses your main affinity and shows your secondary ones. Just push chakra into them and it will burn if it's fire, water and it'll get soggy, earth and it'll crumble, wind and it'll slice in half, and it will wrinkle up if it's lightning. Naruto nodded and pushed chakra into the blank paper. They had to wait a few short seconds before it sliced in half rather violently, some pieces tearing themselves apart. Tobirama was a bit disappointed that it wasn't water, but there was still a great chance that it would be a secondary, and the fact that Naruto had a very strong affinity for wind wasn't anything to scoff at. However, a moment after being cut, the paper turned so soggy the corners started tearing themselves off due to the weight of the water. Even Tobirama was wide-eyed at the display, but that expression was quickly replaced by one of barely controlled elation. Jackpot! Ignoring the fact he just sounded like his gambling addict of a brother that threatened to ruin his good mood, he felt a rare kind of joy at knowing he could finally pass down his water-style expertise to someone who also happened to be his family. Whoa, Naruto breathed out, gratification mixed in with disbelief. So I got wind and water, right? He was beyond happy that he got to share the same natural affinity as his great-grandfather since, to him, it represented a new kind of connection between them. Tobirama nodded. Yes, and not only that, but they are both very strong. I have never seen paper cut in half that violently, and only in myself have I seen a strong enough water affinity to make the paper tear itself at the corners. Really? Yeah, this is awesome! Naruto shouted gleefully while bouncing a bit on the spot. The undead Hokage let him have this moment, though reminded himself to teach the blonde emotional control in the future. Naruto looked at the seal after managing to get a hold of himself, feeling even more excited about finding his secondary affinity. He again pushed some chakra into the paper, which started turning brown and crumbling before catching fire a second later. Naruto almost squealed with delight while Tobirama's eyebrows almost disappeared into his headband, though he smiled nonetheless. Congratulations, my grandson. You have 2 primary affinities and 2 secondary ones. Very few people can boast such a feat. The only ones I know of are Hiruzen and the 3 Tsuchikage, he said proudly. Naruto stared at him in surprise. The old man's also got 2 and 2, yes, but his primary natures are fire and earth, and his secondaries are wind and lightning. Both of you have more potential for elemental ninjutsu than I have, so we now know what field we'll focus a lot of our time and effort on. Of course, we won't neglect your other skills. That would be extremely foolish. Always relying on the same weapon will cause nothing but an early death. Naruto nodded in understanding before turning a bit somber. But one of my main affinities is wind and you don't have it, not even among your secondaries. How are you gonna teach me that? Tobirama looked offended and crossed his arms with a huff. I may not have the affinity for wind, but I know a fair deal of wind jutsu. The blonde looked up at him in bewilderment. I am at least proficient in all 5 natural elements, as is Saru, and so was Hashirama. A shinobi does not need to have the affinity for them to be able to perform the jutsus. The lack of it just makes it more difficult. Naruto grinned up at him in borderline hero worship. All 5 of them? I'm not one to lie or joke about such things, brat. Naruto pouted at the man's form of address as Tobirama smirked just a tiny bit. Like I said, you have more potential for elemental jutsu than I had, so if I have my way, you'll be able to perform all 5 natures by your early 20s. The young shinobi had stars in his eyes. At this rate, and with his grandfather's teachings, not to mention that of the pervy sage, he was gonna be the greatest ninja of the leaf in no time. And this man, his family, had no hesitation in subtly expressing just how much faith he had in Naruto. With unbidden tears in his eyes, he jumped forward and hugged Tobirama like a lifeline. Tobirama's brow furrowed at the gesture. What's wrong? Why are you crying? Thank you, his great-grandson said with as much gratitude as he could muster. His glare softened a bit before sighing and patting Naruto's head. It's alright, now stop with the waterworks. You're getting my armor wet. Naruto reluctantly stepped back. Now, changing chakra nature isn't easy. Mastering a single element will take time and dedication, let alone all 5 of them. We'll start tomorrow, and we're also going to continue what Mr. Ebisu started with, helping you refine your chakra control. You've learned to walk up vertical surfaces and on water, correct? Naruto nodded before frowning. Yeah, but it's not like it did any good. It took me a whole month to summon a normal-sized toad, and I only got to summon the chief toad twice, and one of those times was with the fox's help. If I tried to call him now, I'd probably flop like a ton of bricks. Teleportation is a very hard category of ninjutsu, harder than elemental ninjutsu, Tobirama consoled, knowing that better than anyone, but still pursed his lips and thought afterward. While taking that into account, the summoning jutsu was a C-rank technique for a reason. Naruto easily had the chakra to summon a being much bigger than a human, and if he could walk on water, then it really shouldn't have been a problem for the blonde. Of course, there was the possibility that Naruto simply had no talent for teleportation ninjutsu. It'd be unfortunate, but the boy had proved his potential in numerous other fields, so the possibility wasn't all that bothersome. Besides, he was disinclined to believe that, considering he had summoned Gamabunta after having already fought Niji Hyuga in the exam. A realization hit him then. Naruto, I think I know why your chakra control isn't up to par yet. The Uzumaki perked up and looked at him expectantly. I believe it's because of your constant use of the shadow clone jutsu. Huh? How? A flabbergasted Naruto asked. You're aware that you retain whatever information your clones have learned in their lifespan when they dispel, right? At that, his grandson shook his head in negative, his wide-eyed expression conveying his confusion well enough. Tobirama was a bit surprised but resumed with his explanation regardless. The amount of mental energy you possess is augmented when you receive experience, including the experience of practicing a jutsu over and over. Your continuous utilization of shadow clones and all the accumulated experience, however minimal their value might have been, has created an imbalance between the growth of your chakra capacity and chakra control. It took a few seconds for Naruto to catch on, evidenced by the horrified visage he adopted. But that's my favorite jutsu. I can't not use it, you know. Are you saying I'm gonna be stuck with cruddy control for the rest of my life? I said no such thing. I merely expounded the source of your conundrum. I never said there isn't a solution, the second Hokage huffed, making his annoyance at the boy's interruption clear. Naruto had the decency to look chastised. There's a multitude of methods to improve your control, but we'll start with that tomorrow. He looked west to see the sun being slowly swallowed up by the land. That's it for today. Go to your apartment, and pack your things. Naruto furrowed his eyebrows in confusion. Why? Well, you're going to be living with me from now on in the Senju clan's main compound. Did you truly believe that you were going to continue living on your own now that I'm here? Tobirama asked teasingly. He just stood there frozen for a few moments. Just as he was about to jump for joy, his great-grandfather held him down with a hand on his head. Just go pack your essentials and meet me in the Hokage's office in 3 hours, Tobirama said in a mildly exasperated tone. I believe there is something you two need to discuss. Naruto's grin faded as he was reminded of that fact. Yeah, they did have something to talk about, and one way or another, he was going to get his answers. The fuck's wrong with you, Kakashi? Come on, Anko! The purple-haired Kunoichi sighed dramatically. Here I was, having a nice day, when my book buddy shows up at my door and I think, this day keeps getting better and better, honest. She scowled up at him, her glare worth 1,000 kunai. Instead, you decide to rain on my parade by dumping your personal shit on my doorstep and asking me to teach your student. When you put it like that, it sounds pretty mean of me, Kakashi responded, sheepishly scratching the side of his face. Truthfully, it was going a bit better than expected. But I assure you, I come with most honorable intentions. Your sweet-talking ways ain't gonna work on me, Cyclops. First of all, why would you even want me to teach that fastidious brat of yours? Anko asked, sarcasm and doubt present in her voice. Pretty sure me and her aren't gonna click. Has she even gotten her hands dirty yet? The Hitaki knew that meant if she had taken a life. No doubt she was looking for examples to make her and Sakura seem as incompatible as possible. Reluctant as she may have been to apprentice someone, he stuck by her side when Orochimaru had defected and had saved her life several times in the past. In her mind, she probably thought she owed him a few favors but was now trying to find ways to get out of this particular one. Admittedly, Kakashi was banking on that to, if not convince her, at least get his foot in the door and allow him to get his point across. He wasn't proud of it, but he'd rather not see his student die of incompetence or waste away in the village, mired in pity and self-loathing. Plus, this would be good for Anko too, therapeutical even. Kakashi ran his hand through his hair. No, she hasn't. Neither have the other two. The kunoichi's gaping expression would have been funny any other situation. You serious? Kakashi, what the hell are you doing with these kids? No, wait, let me back up. Those three ain't kids anymore. They haven't been since they put on their headbands. You should know that better than most. The man winced. That statement rang so true, but he had been tentative about sending his team on another mission outside the village after what happened in Wave. But looking back on everything, it might have been better if they learned how to go for the kill before the Chunin exams. Deaths were always expected, and hesitation was one of the more common causes. Yeah. My bad, I guess, but I'm certain at least Sasuke is willing. Naruto too if push comes to shove. He then deliberately changed his tone to a desperate, melodramatic one he'd heard in a few cheesy chick flicks. But with Sakura, it's been so hard. I've tried, and she listens, but we're getting nowhere. If something doesn't change soon, she's going to die an embarrassment to all the Leaf Kunoichi out there in the field. Our enemies will laugh as she. Goddamn it, Kakashi, will you stop talking like someone's grabbed you by the balls? She yelled at him, but there was a shake of laughter there as well. And besides, don't try and pull a fast one on me. I know you and your priorities. You would never deride your own student like that and claim indifference towards their life. So I ask again, why should I train her? You don't give her enough credit, Anko. She has smarts, remarkable chakra control, and the resolve to improve. I know both of you. Trust me, there's no one better in this village to teach her, Kakashi insisted, though she just looked to the side petulantly. But if you need more than that, then I can guarantee she's a hell of a lot better than the alternative. The snake summoner narrowed her eyes at him. Alternative? He nodded. You're one of the most powerful shinobi of the Hidden Leaf, certainly the most powerful kunoichi. You have an array of very useful skills, but will only remain useful if they're passed down. Witnessing the horror dawn on her face, the former ANBU knew she was starting to get it. The Hokage might have just nudged you gently in that direction till now, but soon enough, he's gonna slap you with an order and make you take on a team. Anko kept the shocked visage for a few moments before shaking her head and glaring stubbornly at him. Let's say you're right. Who's to say that these other prospects ain't gonna be better than your frilly, little, pixie dust cupcake? He shrugged in response. Okay, I might have stretched that guarantee thing, but I still insist you two are well suited for each other. Tell me, would you rather take your chances, or take the word of a trusted colleague? She bit her lip in both thought and frustration, stuck between a rock and a hard place. There really was no guarantee that the Hokage would eventually force her to be in charge of a squad, but it was a very logical, very likely conclusion. She eventually turned her gaze upwards, pointing an angry but somewhat dulled look towards him. You're a manipulative son of a bitch, you know that? She said, her voice abundant in vitriol, though her comment stung, he didn't show it. Did I say anything that is untrue? Do you think I have an ulterior motive other than Sakura's growth? Her expression softened a little, but she maintained the intense look. More than that, Anko, I'm your friend. Do you think I'd deliberately make you this uncomfortable for my own gain? Her countenance softened further, becoming more resigned and even slightly shamefaced. She pinched the space between her eyes, shutting them tightly before letting out a sigh, gracing him with a deadpan expression. Fine. I'll do it. Anko then grabbed the front of his flak jacket, glowering up at him in a way that was oddly attractive more than anything. But seeing as this is probably gonna be a long-term thing, after it's over, you'll owe me, book buddy. He gave her his classic eye smile, filled with gratitude, and was satisfied to see a small blush appear on her cheeks. You got yourself a deal. Naruto stared at the wooden door in front of him. He'd been doing this for the last minute already, not knowing what to expect from the upcoming conversation. For all his earlier bravado of demanding answers from the old man, he was on edge when actually about to confront him. He knew why though. The Hokage was not only one of the few people who'd shown unconditional care for him, but the very first, and the blonde had repaid it with his equally unconditional trust. He was afraid the old man's responses were going to lay all that to waste, and the whole idea hurt. He wondered if willful ignorance cowardice was more like it, really would be worth maintaining the relationship they had. No. It wasn't just cowardly, it was stupid. Naruto already knew too much. Even if he didn't outright ask for answers, the questions would still be in his head, nor would it make the need for closure go away. There wouldn't be any genuine trust there, not with him doubting the sincerity of every little thing the old man said. Hell, now that Grandpa Tobirama had told him everything, he'd probably let the blonde know of his reasons volitionally, so not asking wouldn't do shit anyway. Whipping his head left and right vigorously as if trying to physically shake off the hesitation, he raised a hand and knocked twice on the door of the Hokage's office. After hearing an affirmative answer from inside, he opened it and stepped into the room, where he saw his grandfather figure slightly hunched over doing paperwork. The Hokage smiled when he recognized his guest. "Naruto, how nice of you to visit," he said, though his voice held something that made Naruto think he wasn't at all surprised. He probably knew the exact reason for his presence here. He fidgeted for a few moments, the old man waiting patiently with that smile that effortlessly used to put him at ease, before straightening himself. "Yeah. Heard what that snake freak did during the invasion. You okay?" A feeble attempt to hold back on the inevitable, but the Hokage indulged him. Or maybe he was dreading it too. "I'm quite alright, thank you." He then looked the Uzumaki up and down. "Didn't think I'd ever see you bereft of orange." "Nice choice." "Not really my choice, but thanks," Naruto responded. "Grandpa Tobirama sorta convinced me." The god of shinobi chuckled. "Yes, he's always away with words. He might not have the same, exuberant kind of charisma his brother did, but Tobirama sensei has an ability to make people see sense and reason in certain courses of action, sometimes even when there wasn't any. Humans are beings of reason as much as they are of emotion, and he knew how to take advantage of that." "Sounds awesome, but," he inhaled once as he steeled his nerves, forcing himself to do what he came to do, "it's not why I'm here." The old man nodded, a more serious expression overtaking his features. "You've come for answers if I'm not mistaken." "Yeah. I gotta know just why." He managed to stutter out, a note of dejection in his tone. "Why what?" This time, a scowl contorted Naruto's visage. "Don't fuck with me, old man. Not now. I want to know why you didn't tell me about Grandpa Tobirama, or my dad. Why keep me out of the loop?" He growled. "I imagine Sensei must have explained a few reasons why," the Hokage retorted, letting the disrespectful words and tones slide. It was best the boy vented now rather than later. Though frustrated by the answer, or lack thereof, Naruto humored him. "He did, but he ain't the one who made the decision to keep me in the dark." "True enough." He crossed his hands in front of his face, dropping the smile altogether. "So, Naruto, why do you think I didn't tell you?" In response, the genin threw his arms into the air indignantly. "Oh, for fuck's sake. Just once in my life, give me a straight answer." "Naruto Uzumaki." Hiruzen barked sharply, causing the boy in question to flinch. His spine went rigid, feeling a little scared in being at the end of the old man's glare. "Whether you agree with my decisions or not, I am your Hokage. I won't tolerate such open insolence in my office, not even from you. Am I clear?" Naruto understood then. This wasn't old man Sarutobi he was talking to, the genial grandfather figure who'd been a constant ray of happiness in his dark world. This was his Lord Hokage, his leader, superior, and for all intents and purposes his god. And he had just pissed him off. Gulping down the lump in his throat, and used to this toughened version of Hiruzen Sarutobi, he nodded. The Hokage's expression then softened right away, adopting a small smile again, like the moment of sternness had been but a mere illusion. "Good. Keeping what I said in mind, you may relax, Naruto. Still, I want to hear your answer, and I want you to carefully consider your words. Think like a Hokage. Think of the hidden leaf, its security, and its future. Put yourself in my shoes at the time right after the Ninetales attack." Slumping his shoulders in relief, he began to ruminate on the issue. He well understood that just being the fourth Hokage's son alone painted a huge target on his back. His father's accomplishments during the Third Shinobi World War made sure of that. Throw the Senju heritage into the mix, and he became the prime candidate for assassination or kidnapping. If he'd been kidnapped, they'd probably have used the fox's power against the leaf. If a mere genin like him could somewhat do it, then a whole bunch of smarter, more experienced ninja could definitely pull it off better. And if he'd been killed, well, then according to Grandpa Tobirama, the village hidden in the leaves would have experienced a second coming of the Ninetales, and the likelihood of her surviving such an attack twice was close to zilch. Naruto groaned, disheartened to realize he was starting to see reason in the old man's choices. "But still, so what you're saying is, you didn't trust me to keep my mouth shut, right?" he asked bitterly, clenching his fists at the Hokage's blatant lack of trust in his judgment. He stared at the blonde boy seriously for a moment before responding. "Would you have?" Naruto's eyes widened in surprise, not sure if he heard right. "What? Would you have?" "Kept your mouth shut, I mean. If you told me to, then yeah, I would have. I always listened to you," he shouted, outraged at what the older shinobi was insinuating. He had always taken everything he'd said to him to heart. Naruto's anger reached new heights when the Hokage smiled teasingly. "Like all the times you listened to me when I told you to stop your pranking? Or the times I told you to study harder for your tests?" He spluttered for an answer, but only managed to turn his head to the side, unable to argue against that, and feeling even more frustrated that the most he could do was look like a kid with his hands in the cookie jar. He hadn't followed through with any of those things. He tried but always failed in the end. Not exactly a trust builder, he huffed in frustration. "It's not fair." "Not fair?" Hiruzen chuckled, amused by the thought. "My boy, we're shinobi, a pragmatic people first and foremost. Our success isn't based on taking unnecessary chances and risks. You'll find that fairness and honor have little meaning to us. I'd even go as far as to say they're hindrances more than anything. Sad it is to admit, though. Got that right? It was sad, and Naruto didn't know how he and other Hokage could live with themselves if they had to make choices like these on a common basis. It all sounded so wrong, but his own recent conclusions spoke for themselves, finally starting to really see that the oh-so-wrong decision to keep him uninformed had been, if not the right thing to do, what was best for the village. But, as usual, his stubborn side wasn't quite ready to go along with that admission. I still think I would have kept it a secret, the third Hokage shrugged. Maybe you would have, but I'm sorry to say, Naruto, it wasn't a risk worth taking. Would you have found it unreasonable to withhold such sensitive information from a young, loud-mouthed boy desperate for attention, information he could use to bolster his popularity among the populace? The Uzumaki winced. He remembered well a few occasions from his childhood when the hopelessness had reached critical levels, feeling as if the whole world was crushing him from all sides, and there'd been no one there to lend him a hand. At those times, yes. It was for the best that he remained ignorant back then. It somehow made the pain worse. So that's it, huh? I go through that living hell, and I gotta settle for this shitty logic? But shitty logic was no less true than any other sort of it, an aspect of reality he was beginning to accept, however begrudgingly. The old man's face then turned sympathetic. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Naruto. You didn't deserve it in any way, but unfortunately, bad things happen to everyone. You and I aren't exempt from it, and take it from me, Naruto, there are those who've gone through worse. Kakashi for one, Kakashi-sensei? Really? He wouldn't have thought that about his lazy, slightly impish teacher. The blonde then remembered about the memorial stone, all the Kia ninjas who died in the line of duty, among whom were Kakashi's closest friends. Maybe it had something to do with that. It's not my story to tell. The point is, you have friends now, and family. I can tell you to get over it because I don't think anyone really can. The best we can do is learn to live with our demons, the Hokage lectured. Since we're on the topic of family, you'll soon get to meet another one. He stood up straight in shock. He had more family? And someone actually alive. Who? He asked excitedly. Tsunade Senju, the first Hokage's granddaughter, the old man answered. Naruto perked up at the name, recalling Tobirama mentioning her earlier today. She was one of the legendary sanin, a teammate of Pervy Sage. As such, she is your second cousin once removed. You'll be going with both your current masters to track her down and convince her to take the Hokage mantle. You're retiring? Naruto exclaimed, flabbergasted at the notion of anyone else wearing the Hokage hat. Except himself, of course. I'm old, Naruto. This burden grows heavier as both my body and mind grow weaker. It's time for the Hidden Leaf Village to have its fifth Hokage. It's been a long time coming as it is. This mission is of utmost importance, which is why I'll be classifying it as a B-rank assignment. It starts 10 days from now, to give you a little time to train and acquaint yourself with your grandfather. Hiruzen gave him a pointed look. Make the best of that time, Naruto. Listen to everything Tobirama Sensei says. Alright? These days could very well determine the course of your future. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the blond boy straightened his spine and gave a single, firm nod. Yes, sir. A pouch full of kunai? Check. 2 holsters full of shuriken? Check. Wire? Flash bombs? Paper bombs? Check all the way. Seeing that her bags were filled to the brim with deadly weapons and equipment, Sakura adjusted them onto her person, a shuriken holster for each leg. Feeling uncharacteristically pumped, having finally been discharged from the hospital yesterday evening, she set course for her front door. Today was a special day, after all. Today would be her first time doing solo training. No team, just her. No Naruto, no Kakashi, and yes, no Sasuke even. Jitters went up her spine at the thought of it. She'd never done extracurricular training before, but being bedridden for over a day due to mild internal injuries, sustained after having been taken out in a fight with contemptuous ease, had given her plenty of time to think on her current situation and her future. It was pointless to deny anymore just how seriously she was lagging behind her teammates, the distance only growing larger with the passage of time. The invasion had hammered that painful reality home. There they were, on a hastily assigned A-rank mission to rescue Sasuke and about to battle an opponent almost as strong as Zabuza, and she went and made herself in need of saving not 3 seconds into the fight. She'd become nothing more than an additional obstacle for her comrades to overcome while already having the odds set against them. If there was one thing worse than being useless, it was being worse than useless. It was a right shitty feeling, to say the least. Had she not been so deep in her self-loathing, she imagined Kakashi's hospital visit would have been much more awkward, considering the broken vase she'd thrown across the room when her mounting frustration had reached its peak, no longer able to withhold the physical expression of her tumultuous thoughts. Her sensei, as annoyingly perceptive as ever bless his disentranced heart, had suggested training, lighting a spark in her. The realization had hit the female genin like a kick from Rock Lee, one so obvious she knew she would be chiding herself for it in the next several months. If she didn't want to feel like crap about her skills, then she just needed to work her ass off on them. Granted, for all her book smarts, Sakura wasn't at all knowledgeable about advanced training methods, and she had very limited information on jutsu she couldn't do. Kakashi would be the best source for both, but he'd been pretty busy as of late, what with the reparations and such. She didn't want to impose on his working hours, assuming she'd even be able to find her sensei. Fortunately, her genin rank gave her a certain amount of clearance in the jutsu library. Better yet, her 10D rank, and 1A rank mission record 2 when counting Sasuke's rescue further upgraded her into the experienced genin slot, allowing her access to the E, D, and a portion of the C rank jutsu section of the library. Basic, mildly useful techniques, simple and easy on the chakra expenditure. That would come later though. Today was all about physical exercise and weapons practice, as the pink-haired kunoichi was in dire need of some healthy body building. She would make her way to the library after the training session and study up on a few jutsu this evening. No more sentimental fantasies or romantic delusions of heroism. Just remembering the times picturing herself being the archetypal damsel in distress, ready and willing to be rescued by Sasuke Uchiha clad in white armor, made her cringe. How could she had ever been so monumentally stupid as to think that would bring her pride and joy? Like a dream come true? More like a nightmare come reality. She might as well go ahead and buy Naruto a bowl of ramen for every time she called him an idiot. Once, about a week into her time as a genin, her silver-haired sensei had mentioned that death was a shinobi's closest and most constant companion, with all the casual idleness of discussing the weather. Sakura had been a bit mortified at the time, true, but had quickly reverted back to tripping out about lovey-dovey fantasies that would, more likely than not, remain fantasies. But now, the notion reverberated in her head every time she contemplated her ninja career. Like he'd said, her life was on the line every time they accepted a mission, regardless of rank. All it had taken for that to set in was just her team coming close to knocking on death's door half a dozen times. No muss, no fuss. It was a world of scant morals they lived in, and the old Sakura that believed otherwise was a thing of the past, while the new one was ready to move forward. Having eaten a protein and carb-rich breakfast about an hour earlier, she was raring to go. Early on, Kakashi's training regimen, as well as Kakashi himself, had made it quite clear that dieting was off the table. She needed the energy for training, and any excess fat she might have gained by eating consistent meals would have been quickly shaved off with exercise. Needless to say, it had felt like a burden had been lifted off her shoulders. She wondered if Ino had realized it by now. A few knocks on the door brought her out of her musings, perking up when she recognized the sequence. Kakashi used a very specific one that, for security reasons, he'd taught to his genin to know when it was him on their doorstep. Putting on her sandals, she hastily made her way downstairs. Her mom beat her to the door, though, and opened it with a welcoming smile. However, while it was the sight of her sensei that greeted her first, he wasn't alone. "Good day, Kakashi-sensei. Are you here for Sakura?" her mother asked politely. "Yes, but I'm not the only one, Mrs. Haruno. A friend of mine would like to meet her," he said, gesturing to the woman a bit behind him, who Sakura remembered to be the second stage exam proctor. Her dad then came to stand next to Mom, his perpetual grin as big and goofy as ever. "Well, I'm glad Sakura is branching out and making more friends. As opposed to the sweetness of cherry blossoms she was named after, our little girl has been a bit sour lately." The little girl in question blushed and pouted in embarrassment, as her father laughed jovially at his poor joke. Seriously, and in front of her sensei too. Not to mention the total and dangerous-looking stranger by his side. Her mother wasn't making things any better, what with her chuckling along. Kakashi-sensei smiled, or at least appeared to. "I'm afraid this isn't a social call, Mr. Haruno. I assure you, though, Sakura is no trouble," he answered, his tone genial but with a lilt that conveyed his seriousness. "Oh, then I suppose I'd better pull out my business pants and hey." Both his sentence and his grin were cut off when the purple-haired woman stepped forward and squeezed between them. Sakura felt her gut clench a bit when she stopped in front of the genin and loomed over her with a severe expression, different and scarier than the sadistic but laid-back smirk she displayed at the exam. Her shoulders tensed when Anko suddenly put a hand on her head and just stood there, a look of mild concentration on her face. She saw her parents ready to come to her rescue but were prevented from doing so by Kakashi, who merely shook his head. She didn't know if she ought to be reassured or cursing him as a traitor, leaving her alone with this blood-sucking monster. The image of her slicing open Naruto's cheek and licking away a wad of his blood was still in her head, disgusting and absolutely unnerving. After about half a minute, the exam proctor finally moved, only to start groping her right arm, lightly pressing her fingers against her muscles, moving from shoulder to forearm, then doing the same thing with her other one. She straightened out shortly after and turned to give her parents a scrutinizing once-over, almost like she was assessing their threat level or something, before looking back to her. Anko's expression softened a mite, but it maintained its earlier gravitas, and her gaze went to Kakashi-sensei. "I'll take her." Sakura froze on the spot. That phrase had so many meanings, she didn't know what to make of it, though her admittedly short experiences with the woman made her think of the worst. Her parents appeared to be of the same mind. "You'll take her?" her mom asked in an affronted tone, shaking the Hataki's hand off her shoulder. "Look, I don't know who you are, but you don't get to barge in our home, harass my daughter, and make demands immediately afterward. Just who the hell are you?" That nightmare-worthy smirk graced the purple-haired kunoichi's face. "Who, me?" Why, I'm your little girl's new sensei. Huh! The pink-haired genin switched her gaze between Anko and Kakashi, silently demanding an explanation as to what the fuck was going on, and hoping beyond hope that the two were just pulling her leg and her teacher wasn't actually planning to leave her alone with this thing. Unfortunately, the brass has decided to temporarily disband Team 7 and assign a personal tutor to each of its genin. Anko Mitarashi here was eager to accept the duty of taking over Sakura's training for the foreseeable future. The somewhat trenchant glare the woman sent his way gave Sakura the impression she'd been anything but. No doubt the smart aleck ninja had probably twisted her arm into accepting this arrangement. Maybe they could bond over their mutual feelings of annoyance for the silver-haired man. Really? How come? Her dad asked curiously. I'm afraid I can't discuss it at length. I myself will continue Sasuke's training, while Lord Jiraiya takes over Naruto's, Kakashi responded before addressing her directly. Now Sakura, Anko is one of the most powerful shinobi the Hidden Leaf has to offer. The fact her mission flow is about to be cut by at least half to allow her to focus on training you, her very first apprentice, is a most singular honor. Work hard and don't squander this opportunity. Okay? She nodded with a wary glance toward the kunoichi. His laziness aside, if he felt her training and well-being were secure in Anko's hands, then maybe she was taking her fretting a bit overboard. It came to her suddenly, almost gasping in realization. This was exactly what she'd been looking for, what she needed to get stronger and catch up to her teammates. A sensei whose efforts would be exclusively focused on her. If Anko really was as strong as Kakashi portrayed her to be, then her advanced training conundrum had just been solved. Regardless of the fact that her new mentor seemed to have all of Naruto's loudmouth tendencies and none of his innocence. If the chit-chat is over and done with, I'd like us to get a move on sometime today, Anko grunted, giving her a meaningful glance. Taking the hint, Sakura headed for the door, saying goodbye to her parents along the way, who responded in with wishes of good luck, and such. An arm was placed around her shoulders a few moments after stepping outside, the beige sleeve and calloused but slightly dainty fingers identifying it as the exam proctor's. Kakashi-sensei stopped to her left and graced her with an eye smile and friendly wave. Then, she felt a pulling sensation and the world shifted before her eyes. Nausea built up in her body, her head spinning as the colors passed by too fast for her mind to register, accompanied by a light crushing all around her form. A moment of panic rose, an instinctive and primal fear, but the unexpected phenomenon came to an abrupt end before it could completely overtake her. Bending forward, she steadied herself by placing her hands on her knees and inhaling deep gulps of air. After the panic and nausea abated, she took a look around, the fear making a threatening comeback when she recognized the imposing wire fence, standing tall like an ominous vigil before what lay inside it, the forest of death. Gulping down her anxiety along with the bad memories, the genin stood upright. Was that a teleportation jutsu? No. That was a pimped-out version of your regular body flicker, her new sensei informed her. By connecting our chakra when I touched you, I was able to take you along for the ride. Anko began walking, thankfully not towards the looming forest in the back. Instead, she made her way to the rocks positioned about 40 to 50 meters away from the fence. She took a seat on one end, what Sakura could only describe, an enticing way, leaning on her hands behind her, chest jutting out a bit, and one leg over the other. She didn't know if she did it on purpose, or if it just came naturally to her. Either way, knowing the woman was made of sterner, less indolent stuff than Kakashi Hatake, she opted to remain on her feet with her spine straight and back rigid. She just gave her the vibe that said that Sakura ought to avoid taking any undue risks. The jonin raised an eyebrow and snorted. Sit down, Private Bubblegum. We ain't training quite yet. Introductions first. I've read your academy file and played 20 questions with Kakashi, but I'd like to hear it from the horse's mouth, too. Nodding, she lowered herself down into a seated position with her legs crossed and then looked at her mentor expectantly. Fine, me first. As you already know, my name is Anko Mitarashi. I like dango, red bean soup, and torturing any unlucky victims who find themselves in my unmerciful grasp. Her sensei gave her a sadistic grin, the implications more than obvious. Sakura herself was now one of them. I don't like whiny, crybaby pissants who think our ninja career is some fairy tale wonderland. My current goal in life is to turn the shit pile of pathetic that is Sakura Haruno into a real shinobi. She cringed uncomfortably, more at the very apparent opinion Anko had of her than the language. Nonetheless, she composed herself and answered in kind. My name is Sakura Haruno. I like umebashi and Anko dumplings. The older kunoichi laughed at that, the irony not lost on her. I don't like having to rely on others to save me. Feeling a swell of determination at the reminder, and even a little vindictiveness, she gazed steadily back at Anko. And my goal is to help you turn the shit pile of pathetic I am right now into a shinobi strong enough to kick even your ass someday. Though her brow raised a bit in surprise, the woman's visage was predominantly unimpressed. A slight quirk of the lips betrayed her well-hidden amusement. Gutsy little thing, ain't ya? Making such lofty proclamations, and we haven't even started yet. Private Bubblegum, I ought to give you a good spanking to teach you some respect, but I'll refrain until we start training. She then took in Sakura's entire form. Hell, guessing by the gear you're wearing, you were about to go out and hit the training fields yourself when Lazy Bones and I came, right? The girl nodded, At which Anko continued, "You're not entirely hopeless then, I admit, which brings me to my next point." Her relaxed expression dropped, allowing one notably more severe, almost accusatory, to take place. She resisted the urge to gulp and kept her face effortfully blank, the tension growing more and more palpable. "Do you know just how lucky you are?" Taken aback momentarily by the acerbic undertone in the question, the genin tried to appease her, figuring she was still miffed for being saddled with her. "Yes, Anko-sensei. I'm very grateful to you for accepting me as your apprentice." "Good answer, but no," the jonin stated firmly, raising a hand and extending two of her fingers upwards. "You've got two things to be grateful for, each of them out of your control. They're both based on the same thing, though, your genes." "Huh? I don't get it?" she asked, confused. "Remember that groping session earlier? That was me examining your body and chakra. And let me tell you, you've been blessed, brat. Physically, almost everything about you speaks above average, or the potential for it, even if you don't look it now." Fingers began dropping as Anko recounted her findings: constitution, height, chakra reserves, chakra control, you name it. "Do you know what somata types are?" Flabbergasted and more than a little awed by the unexpected response, she bobbed her head rather mutely. Yeah? Somata types are types of human physique people naturally have. They're divided into the ectomorphic, the skinny body, the mesomorphic, the toned body, and the endomorphic, the rotund body." "Right. You, Private Bubblegum, are mesomorphic," Anko confirmed. "Unless you starve or permanently bedrid yourself, you're never going to be just skin and bones. And not only that, but putting on muscle ain't all that difficult for you. Even now, with as little physical training as you've had, there's a level of muscle tone on you. Your chakra seems to be in on the ploy, too. I've known kunoichi your age who worked twice, even 3 times harder than you, but had a chakra capacity not a single drop bigger than your own. While not anything super like mine or that big-mouthed teammate of yours, by the time you stop growing upwards, you could have more chakra than 70% of the hidden leaf kunoichi, no sweat. To top it all off, you've got such damn near perfect control to go along with it. You could probably, well, do fucking anything, really." Her sensei then locked on her with an intimidating glare, causing her to almost take a step back lest she risk soiling herself. "And what exactly have you done with this shitload of potential thrumming in your veins? Played hooky during your P class? Twirled a lock of hair and made googly eyes at the Uchiha in the middle of every spar? Or maybe you had pervy fantasies about sucking his D." Okay. I get it. I suck. I screwed up. I know all that already." She interrupted the adult loudly, feeling gradually worse with every accusation she made, not to mention thoroughly embarrassed at the last implication. But she couldn't afford to wallow, not again, so she did not need to be reminded and be thrown back into that depressed state from yesterday. She dug herself into one hole already. She didn't want to end up digging an entirely new one. "That's why we're here, isn't it? To fix it, and I don't see how pointing out mistakes I'm already aware of is gonna make a difference," Sakura argued strongly. Anko narrowed her eyes. She couldn't tell whether it was in anger or something else before sighing deeply in resignation. "Fair enough. No use crying over spilled milk, I guess," the snake summoner agreed begrudgingly, though Sakura could sense that she wasn't yet completely over the issue. She should probably expect at least one more tirade about it in the future. "Count your blessings that you're a late bloomer, brat. Now, I know most of you preteen girls want the big titties ASAP so you could look all pretty and shit. In your case, however, you should count yourself lucky for being on the very cusp of puberty at 13, Anko said pointedly. "Excuse me?" She stuttered, mildly offended and crossing her arms over her chest. A late bloomer? Her? She'd been one of the tallest girls in her graduating class, and it wasn't like she was lacking in certain areas of the female anatomy. Not any more than the other girls her age, at least. More importantly, if what her mentor said was true, she failed to understand how it played a part in her training. "You heard me." Anko grinned smugly, arching her back just a bit more just to mock her. "Puberty is the period where your body is most susceptible to growth and change. Your hormone production skyrockets, and that is the window of opportunity we're going to abuse maliciously. A surplus of growth hormones and even testosterone is circulating in your bloodstream, which boosts both your muscle growth and chakra capacity like it was going out of style." Sakura's eyes widened in understanding. "Now that you mention it, I remember reading about that once." She furrowed her brow and gave her sensei an inquiring look. "But still, sensei, how do you know I'm just entering puberty? Most girls are 11 when it happens. I haven't ever heard of a 2-year delay happening." The purple-haired kunoichi shrugged indifferently. "Chalk it down to late onset puberty. And besides, who gives a shit? I just told you it was to your benefit. I could tell because any good ANBU and torture expert should know human anatomy like the back of their hand. Plus, it helped that I got to see your parents, tall bastards they are. Your mom is, 172 centimeters. And your old man is around 185. She then gave the girl a pointed look. "But you? With your current height, without that puberty-instigated growth spurt, you would be half a head shorter than your mom by the time the growing stops. Let me tell you, without some physical deficit, that would be almost unheard of. So I did the math. That's it, that was true enough. Both her mom and dad were of above average height, and the likelihood of her being tall was therefore nigh unequivocal. Anko's theory was also supported by the fact she hadn't had her first period yet, an event she wasn't looking forward to thanks to her mother's warnings and the biology books she read. Cramps, nausea, moodiness, or better yet, all of them together sounded just grand. Well, it was a nice little chat we had, but let's not waste any more daylight, Anko said as she stood up and a kunai shot into her hand from within her sleeve. A darkly amused expression graced her features when Sakura stiffened, eyes trained on the weapon twirling around her index finger. It's already been established that your physical side needs the most work, so we'll start with that. The kunai embedded itself into the soil by her side. Taijutsu only. Come at me with the intent to snap my neck. What was the essence of power? Was it having numerous skills, never really mastering any one but having proficiency all the same, counteracting the downside with overwhelming variety and unpredictability? Or was it having much fewer skills to rely on, but possessing supreme competence in their execution to balance that flaw out? It didn't end there. There were subcategories to consider. Was it better to have abilities that focused on taking down one opponent, or those that had a wider range destructive effect, intended to finish off multiple foes? Was offensive better than defensive? Was defensive better than supplementary? Would you rather trap or weaken your enemy first and deal the finishing blow when incapacitated, or dodge, defend, and hide until they ran out of steam? This was a riddle Sasuke Uchiha had been trying to solve since he'd been 8 years old, and it felt like he was no closer to an answer than he had been then. Maybe even worse, considering he had lost to someone his idiot teammate, class clown, and best friend had beaten. All that training, all that time spent making sure his considerable talent was cultivated to achieve maximum potential, all for the sake of becoming strong enough to kill him. It all felt so wasted. Sparks of electricity extended from his hand as he growled in frustration, bathing the grass right underneath it in white light. What was it that made Naruto Uzumaki so damn strong in such a short time? His training? Or maybe his style simply had a natural advantage against Gaara, while Sasuke's own was incompatible? Naruto had said it was his desire to protect his friends, him and Sakura, that had given the boy strength, but doubts plagued his mind. There had been plenty of Uchiha clansmen on the day of the massacre that had something precious to protect, and it hadn't stopped Itachi from butchering them and their families. Hatred drove them both, Itachi to kill indiscriminately, and Sasuke to kill for vengeance. It gave them a reason to test their power and improve further, to end life for their own sake. The only thing that set them apart was their moral convictions. Itachi Uchiha was evil incarnate, while Sasuke Uchiha was the one who would make things right, by any means necessary. For him to do that, he needed to get stronger. But how would he do that, and what path to take? Fight like his friend or fight like his brother? The large stone formation stood a few meters in front of him like the world's most convenient target, charging at it with no hesitation. Naruto was basically a chakra monster, able to dish out highly taxing jutsu with the frequency of a pressurized hose spewing out water. Generally, that took the form of covering an entire area in shadow clones, effectively creating a sea of garish, eye-scorching orange. Plus, there was his otherworldly stamina and durability, enduring hits and stress like a champ and a half, and then recovering in record time. If nothing else, Sasuke could admire that about him. Itachi, on the other hand, was like a scalpel. If a scalpel could slice through even the most sturdy materials by finding the weak spot with amazing analytical skills. He didn't know all his brother's jutsus and tricks, but he'd always been something of a perfectionist, practicing a technique until he could do it flawlessly. Though that method would normally take a lot of time, the rotten bastard wasn't a genius for nothing. However, the one blemish in his spotless repertoire was his chakra reserves. The raven-haired genin remembered his father once complaining about how his brother had average reserves for a leaf shinobi, and below average for an Uchiha. In other words, spamming out chakra-intensive jutsu would rarely ever be something Itachi could afford. For the time being, that was the only advantage Sasuke was consciously aware of, since his latest medical tests, taken just 2 days ago at Kakashi's insistence, showed that his chakra capacity was in the 94th percentile of all 13-year-old leaf ninja in the last 20 years. His arm dug deep into the stone, the Chidori carving a path with minimal ease, hence the jutsu practice. If he was to practice the Chidori every 2 days, do daily physical exercise, and maybe learn another fire technique from his clan's library, his increased control complemented by the boost in chakra capacity should allow him to perform the powerful jutsu thrice a day in about 2 weeks' time, give or take a day or two. That is, without using Orochimaru's curse mark. Stepping back from the smoking rock formation while turning his Sharingan off, he gripped the back of his left shoulder where the curse seal was located. Its influence significantly diminished from within the barriers of Kakashi's seal. Its presence was nonetheless like a steady thrum, not unlike the pulse of his heart beneath his fingers, never letting him forget that it was there. He didn't know where he stood with it. On one hand, it gave him power that allowed his body to surpass its current limitations, and with it came a sense of ecstasy that was just intoxicating. And yet, that same feeling made him wary. It was one thing to experience a surge of bloodlust at the thought of his wretched sibling. It was another at the thought of hurting someone else, like that sound genin he had never even met before then. Such an effortless loss of his composure unnerved him. He was afraid if he was to truly give in even further, he'd end up hurting someone close to him, or worse. Orochimaru of the Sanin was an epitome of evil on the same level as Itachi. Sasuke knew that. For whatever reason he'd been given this thing, it hadn't been charity. But still, the curse mark had saved his life. But even with its help, Gaara had come out triumphant in their battle. And later, when Naruto, in worse condition than him, had stepped forward and took that monster down, the feeling of inadequacy had been overwhelming. That smile Naruto had worn on his face when he'd fallen prey to the spell of unconsciousness had only made the feeling worse, and this only made the sense of internal conflict worse. Naruto was his best friend, not that he'd admit it, and he felt like a bastard for feeling contempt toward his progress. But no matter by how much he imagined Naruto getting stronger, he could never imagine the blonde defeating someone of Itachi's caliber. And if he couldn't do it, how could Sasuke, someone who was possibly even weaker, do it? This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He was meant to be the best, the strongest, for only the strongest would be able to bring the traitor Itachi Uchiha to justice. And yet, as always, he was second best. First to his brother, now to his friend. How had such a mortifying vicissitude come to pass? His hands shook with rage and frustration, putting them in the proper position for the Chidori's activation. Having done it twice already, he knew what he was about to do was extremely inadvisable, outright stupid even, not that he cared. He just wanted to destroy something before the welling emotions became too much to handle. Flickers of lightning-style chakra began to emanate from his hand, the jutsu's characteristic sound reaching his ears. However, a sudden grip on his arm knocked him out of his stupor, the electricity fading into nothingness. My. It breaks my heart to know my own students don't listen to my advice. The Uchiha looked up at Kakashi's masked face, his own visage slipping back to its usual expression as he scoffed to futilely hide the lapse in judgment. I'll consider controlling my impulses as soon as you do the same thing about your tardiness. And here I thought it was part of my charm, but I guess that's a fair deal, the white-haired shinobi said, releasing his arm. He cocked his head at his student. Penny for your troubled, emo-ish thoughts? Sasuke scowled as he rubbed the appendage gingerly, the expected ripple of pain coming through from using the Chidori more times than he should have. Good thing he'd done the physical training earlier. His arm would have been too shot to work out now. He turned to his sensei. What are you doing here? The man sniffed, tucking his hands into his pockets before answering. Hello to you too, my rude, little genin. I just thought you should know that I'm taking over your personal training from now on until further notice. His brow furrowed in confusion. Hadn't he been doing that already? What do you mean? What I mean is team training has officially been cancelled, Kakashi clarified, causing him to stop and stare in surprise. Each genin of Team 7 is receiving private tuition. I am assigned to be your personal trainer, while Naruto and Sakura each have their own allocated tutors. Sasuke didn't know what to think about that. He'd gotten used to the intensity and shenanigans those two commonly displayed. They were friends, simple as that. Perhaps not the sort that hung out constantly and went out for barbecue, but a solid relationship was shared between the three rookie shinobi. Nevertheless, he wasn't blind to what this new arrangement signified. With their forces depleted and assignments split between reconstruction and regular missions, the fact the Hokage disbanded his team and appointed shinobi, all of them high-ranking, more likely than not to instruct them individually during such a crucial time, meant that a vested interest was placed upon Team 7's development. He couldn't help the smirk of pride gracing his face. That also meant something else. It seems I'll be making an effort to get my impulses under control sooner than I thought, he said to his mentor teasingly. Since the Hokage himself had authorized this arrangement, it constituted a certain level of importance, which meant the days of Kakashi's lousy sense of timing had been brought to a swift and abrupt halt, at least in regards to Sasuke's training. The ninja in question merely shrugged. Alas, all good things must come to an end. Seeing as you're a bit too worse for where to train anymore, we'll start tomorrow at Training Ground 7, the usual time. Before, the usual time had meant Team 7 meeting up 8 in the morning at the aforementioned training grounds. Well, the three genins meeting up at 8, and their sensei arriving anywhere between 9:30 and 11 a.m. with lame excuses abound. Thank God he hadn't done that during the month before the final stage of the exams, and it was doubtful Kakashi's annoying habit would make a rebound tomorrow. He frowned at the reminder that not everything would be usual, though. Kakashi, will the others and I be teaming up again in the future? The black-haired teen asked, too embarrassed to directly confess his unease at the thought of Team 7 being forever disbanded. The crinkle in the adult's eye showed he well understood the underlying emotion. I imagine so. You three have formed a rapport that is ultimately reliable, shaky and turbulent as it might be on occasion. It would be a pity and a disservice to let it go to waste. He gave his protege a knowing look, which, by the way, you almost single-handedly achieved during the invasion. Sasuke narrowed his eyes in the man's direction. Gaara was getting away. What was I supposed to do? Just sit and do nothing? Despite what you and many others may think, that is not necessarily a bad idea. Getting involved also carries the risk of making things worse, or getting yourself killed for nothing. No one told you to chase after him, and I'm pretty sure I didn't give any such orders myself, Kakashi said with uncharacteristic firmness. I was ordered, actually, by the proctor, he responded pointedly. His sensei's eye widened for a moment before sighing in mild annoyance. Remind me to give Genma a talking to for ordering my genin around. The teen snorted in amusement. It had been the middle of an invasion, a direct attack on their home village. Teacher-student relationships hadn't mattered, only official rankings had. This Genma, at least a chunin and higher up than him, had full authority to command Sasuke to go after Gaara and stop him, since the redhead had obviously been a key element in the Sans arsenal. He didn't bother correcting Kakashi, though. There was little doubt the man already knew all that. He was probably just trying to vent, and frankly, Sasuke simply didn't care enough about the proctor to stop any confrontation between him and the silver-haired jonin. And besides, our fight wasn't finished, he said, so low Kakashi almost failed to hear him. His sensei stared at him blankly, making it impossible for him to even guess his thoughts. After a few short moments of awkward silence, the man sighed again, resignation permeating the exhaled air. You kids are really gonna drive me up the wall one day, unless your troublesome penchant for acting with wild abandon doesn't kill me first, of course. He combed a gloved hand through his hair, a single, stern eye keyed on him. I can understand pride and wanting to prove your strength, but is it really worth risking your life to such an extent? The teen glared at him sharply, incensed at his insinuation. What did he know? If I can't risk my life against someone like Gaara, then how can I ever hope to face him? And how can you ever hope to face him if you're dead? That statement momentarily caught him off guard, and he turned his gaze away, not wanting to admit its validity. Kakashi continued regardless, you're gunning for Itachi to avenge the murder of your family. But your current, living family would despair if you were to just keel over like that. Have you ever thought about that? No, he hadn't. Even as they were now, most of his thought process was expended on either finding new ways to improve or imagining a gruesome death for the treacherous Uchiha at his own hands. There simply hadn't been a reason to contemplate anything else. However, now that Kakashi brought the topic up, his thoughts strayed toward his teammates, the lovable, if vexatious dumbass that was Naruto, and Sakura, the hot-headed fangirl with analytical skills comparable to the Sharingan and enough book smarts to fill an entire classroom, and then some. Simply the very idea of them being hurt in any way brought an unexpected pang to his chest, caused by a caring he hadn't fully realized he developed for them. Still, since day one he made it crystal clear what his ultimate ambition was, and not even they could persuade him otherwise. They'd understand. At least, Naruto would, he remarked. If anyone could understand the need to get stronger, the unshakable drive for a goal, it was the blonde Uzumaki. Naruto, really? Reason and he aren't exactly on good terms, you know, his sensei snorted. You ought to stop telling him not to run headlong into trouble if you're just gonna turn around and do the same thing. Sets a bad example and all that, and then you can't really blame the guy for thinking such advice is all a load of crap. In spite of the fact that Kakashi was somewhat insulting him in a very unsubtle, roundabout fashion, Sasuke smirked to himself. Maybe he was setting a bad example, but it wasn't like Naruto had anyone to go headhunting after either. As fiercely opinionated and temperamental as he was, the Uchiha survivor didn't think he had enough bad bones in him to ever think spitefully enough of anyone to actually want to kill them. Enough to want them pounded to the ground, certainly, but no more than that. Speaking of which, he wondered who had the honor of teaching that loser. Tobirama aimed a backhand chop towards Naruto's head. The strike was promptly dodged via ducking underneath it. The former Kage then sent a low kick with his left leg, which Naruto avoided by jumping over it. His mistake, though, was jumping upwards instead of backward, thus remaining within Tobirama's reach, and the man had every intention of pointing it out. Bringing the foot he had just used for the kick down to the ground, he pivoted on it and sent a spinning kick with the other one. However, in place of the blonde being sent flying to the side, Tobirama was momentarily caught off guard when Naruto put his hand on the leg, not to stop it but to use the force of the kick to spin himself and lash out with his own foot. He, of course, blocked the kick with his left forearm, but his great-grandson immediately put his other foot on the appendage and pushed himself off in a backflip away from him. In a burst of speed, Tobirama closed the distance and landed a light palm strike to Naruto's back while he was still in the air, getting a yelp out of him and knocking him back a few meters. Your reaction was good, but unless you're going to counter immediately after, a dodge by leaping should only be done if you're going to put some distance between yourself and your foe, the white-haired man lectured his student. Yes, sensei, Naruto groaned a bit as he stood up, though Tobirama knew his durability and recovery speed ensured that the blow hadn't caused any great pain. Out of all his physical attributes, Naruto's stamina and reserves of energy were by far the most impressive. An Uzumaki through and through. Beside that, this hadn't been the first time his descendant had surprised him with a maneuver or evaded an attack he had expected to land in the last 6 days. While Naruto had a few rough edges, he often made up for them with an instinctive ability to perform unorthodox moves on the fly. Tobirama had realized early on the truth behind Kakashi's assessment of his former student. Naruto's short-range combat instincts truly were phenomenal. As the Sharingan wielder had said, when intuition steadily took over and emotion was replaced by intense focus, Naruto entered a state that made him seem like an entirely different person, savage in his effectiveness without actually becoming a savage. It was somewhat eerie of just how much it reminded him of Madara Uchiha. He didn't despair over it. In fact, and he could not believe the idea was even contemplated, Tobirama was celebrating their likeness. A monster and traitor Madara might have been, But more than either of those things, he had been an incredibly powerful shinobi. Overall, Naruto's preferred style of combat was much more like Madara's and his own than, say, Hashirama's. Though he'd focus on direct, brute force at the start, the emphasis would switch to speed and agility as they progressed. His flexibility was good, and he had an uncanny ability to use unpredictable patterns of attacks when really into the spar. His strength was above average for his age, not unexpected of an Uzumaki and a Senju. Either way, it was blatantly obvious that heavy taijutsu training was a must. Tobirama turned his gaze toward the 10 Naruto shadow clones being instructed by one of his own on the kunai hovering chakra exercise. Having listened to Jiraiya's advice, chakra control had been the main focus of Naruto's training. His water walking had been polished up a bit by having him and his shadow clones do taijutsu katas while standing on the surface of the river. However amusing the blonde's yells of dismay had been for every time one of them fell into the water, the undead Kage was quick to give him a silence as golden lecture. 2 days into their training, Tobirama had started him on nature transformation with water as his first choice. Though off to a bit of a rocky start, he'd managed to get a leaf entirely wet on the 4th day of training, which was followed by him swiftly learning the water style, liquid bullet on the 5th. The first step to mastering wind would begin tomorrow, and he expected Naruto to learn a wind-style jutsu by the time they had to leave. Most of this would take place in the mornings and afternoons. After a big lunch and an hour of rest, plenty of time with his enhanced healing and metabolism, Tobirama would have him do a variety of physical workouts. Most of them were meant to target his speed, coordination, and reflexes, making good use of the woods around them as an impromptu obstacle course, often made more challenging by the various touches Tobirama added to the exercises. He had taught Naruto on the first day that muscle growth was a defense mechanism, the body's reaction to prevent itself from feeling the same strain it felt during a heavy workout. As such, the growth happened not in the midst of the exercises, but during the healing process. With Naruto's accelerated recovery rate and durable body, it meant the Jinchuriki could train his body longer and more often than more conventional human beings, without the negative health drawbacks. Of course, while clones could help in the development of muscle memory, their physical condition reflected the original, not the other way around, and even the transference of reflexes through clones wasn't a perfect practice. It all boiled down to Naruto having to do each and every exercise alongside his copies during agility and reflex training, and doing strength training by his lonesome. All in all, it had been a satisfying 6 days. Tobirama had little to complain about. Perhaps the only thing that put a bit of a damper on that was Naruto's almost non-existent self-control. God, he could be loud when excited. Thankfully, he'd seemed to finally get the gist of his repeated rebukes and toned it down somewhat in the last couple days. It was a start, if nothing else. Naruto, raising a hand, as he taught him, brought him back to the present. Grandpa, can I be the attacker now? I've been doing defense and countering for the last 2 hours. Glancing up at the sun, he realized it was true. They'd started the sparring session by creating 3 clones each, where he and his copies would be on the offensive and the Narutos would defend by dodging, parrying, blocking, and countering, the only time they were allowed to strike back. After about an hour had gone by, all the clones had been undone, but the originals had kept fighting to allow Naruto to assimilate the combined experience. Yes, I think we've practiced your defensive capabilities enough for today. Take a breather, Naruto. The Uzumaki slumped his shoulders in relief, emitting a loud sigh. Even he had started feeling some effects of exhaustion at the rate they'd been going. Hell, boredom had begun setting in the middle of a fight, of all things, thank God. Oogie boogie boogie, what the foo? Something hard struck his back, sending a lance of pain down his spine. The blow sent him flying and then rolling along the ground. When he finally stopped, he groaned lightly in discomfort and pulled himself into a seated position, rubbing his aching back. He glared at the intruder, also having noticed he was about 15 meters away from where he'd been standing previously. The fuck, pervy sage? That super pervert only had the gall to laugh, already in one of his stupid poses. It is I, the great Jiraiya, and I've come to test your mettle, young grasshopper. That little that was below the belt, attacking me while my guard was down, ya perv. So unfair. Fair? The sage asked, an exaggerated expression of confusion and outrage overtaking his visage. I know not what this is. I, boy, am a shinobi. Growling under his breath, Naruto got to his feet. Well, if that was how he wanted to play it, fine. Bending his knees, he sprang forward with a punch aimed at the face, grinning disgustingly at him. A direct frontal attack? You're a fool for thinking me such an amateur, boy. Pervy sage exclaimed, ducking down and aiming an uppercut toward his stomach. When it landed, however, Naruto burst into smoke. Surprise flitted across Jiraiya's face for a mere moment before he turned around to block a kick from the blonde. A substitution with a shadow clone? A trick? Naruto smirked. The hell's a trick? I'm a ninja, dummy sage, and there's more where that came from. A shadow then appeared right above the man's head, growing larger by the millisecond. The sanin reacted at a moment's notice, leaping backward to dodge the axe kick from a second Naruto, the force of the attack causing a miniature crater to form beneath his foot, a small cloud of smoke rising from it. Jiraiya stared blankly for a second, the first Naruto dispelling to reveal himself as the shadow clone, before laughing jovially. The genin didn't know whether he was being mocked or not, but the sound alone made one of his eyes twitch. This guy really knew how to get under his skin sometimes. That's the spirit, kid, Pervy Sage declared proudly, entering into another fighting pose. Now, show me what you got. Naruto was all too happy to oblige him, charging forward with intention of pummeling his face. Tobirama just observed the sudden sparring bout from the sidelines. He was glad to note that it didn't take his great-grandson any time at all to enter his focus state, though he could still merely be high from their earlier session. Nonetheless, progress was visible, and that was all that mattered for the moment. After about 20 minutes, Jiraiya decided he had seen enough and ended the fight by locking the boy's arms behind his back and planting him against the ground on his stomach. Naruto struggled for a few short seconds but soon realized he was in no position to continue their spar. Fine, you win. Get off me already, he demanded, disappointed that he hadn't succeeded in landing even a single hit on his opponent. The Toad Sage hummed, letting go of the hold. Not too shabby, Squirt. Naruto let out a small whoosh of air, exhaustion coming on strong now. He looked up at his master, calm in comparison to his prior theatrical aura. Why do you have to be such a goddamn drama queen all the time, Pervy Sage? Isn't the fact you're the most peeping of all peeping toms bad enough? The old goat shrugged nonchalantly, a small grin blooming on his face. Experience makes you both wiser and weirder. When you get to be my age, you start to appreciate the simple things in life. A single, distinctly unimpressed eyebrow was raised. As if the blonde genin would buy that he'd ever been anything but an exhibitionistic lek. Simple, huh? He muttered, scoffing. Sounds about right. His muttering apparently hadn't been silent enough for the sage rolled his eyes. That's taking the pot calling the kettle black thing to a whole new level. You're the last person I want to hear that from. I got enough of that shit from my team back when I was a young buck. Well, I'm sure you had it comin', Naruto commented, supreme confidence in his tone. A chuckle was his response. Yeah. Admittedly, I did a few times. Trust me, the old man may give off that grandfatherly vibe like a boss, but he wears the Hokage hat for a reason. He could go all prison warden on ya in the blink of an eye. Scary old coot he is. Naruto shivered, his last meeting with the third Hokage well etched in his psyche, that short moment of terror when the strict disciplinarian had taken over the person whom, in his head, he had dubbed Grandpa like a demonic possession. He is. I know. Really? Jiraiya asked, a note of bewilderment in his voice. What did you do to piss him off so bad? Nothing. We were arguing, and I yelled a bit, sure, but it's not like it's the first time I raised my voice at him or anything, the Uzumaki answered, uncertain. Huh. Then you probably didn't really make him angry at all. The sage waved a hand dismissively. You're a pretty brazen kid, you know. He probably just wanted to teach you to show respect while in the office. Wouldn't want you bursting in and acting like a cocksure brat while in the middle of negotiations with a noble, or worse, a fellow Kage, unlikely as it is. Naruto cringed, imagining the scenario from an outsider's view. He would have been hard-pressed to trust the authority of a Kage who couldn't even keep their youngest and most impressionable subordinates in line. The shinobi of the Hidden Leaf held deep trust in the old man, and Naruto would have died of shame if he had ever had a hand in portraying him as an incompetent chief of his people. I know I shouldn't be carped at him like I did, but I couldn't help it. So many damn secrets, all to keep me safe, and I want to find fault with it, but it's hard when I know how royally I could have fucked up had I been told the truth, the Jinchuriki said somberly. Them's the breaks, kid. It's the Hokage's executive prerogative to withhold sensitive information that could put a serious dent in the village should it fall into the wrong hands. Don't think you're all that special in that regard, the Sannin replied, putting a hand on Naruto's shoulder in a mild gesture of comfort. Naruto appreciated the small effort, though he felt a bit like shit about it. He perked up then, his eyes gleaming eagerly. So, Pervy Sage, you here to teach me a super cool jutsu? You sure took your sweet time finding us. Sorry, not yet. I just came here to see how you're doing. Soon though, Jiraiya responded, much to Naruto's disappointment. A sudden thoughtful expression graced the man's face, looking toward the clones practicing the kunai hovering. He shrugged in sort of what the heck way soon after. Why not? Here, kid. I've got something for you. Reaching into his coat, he pulled out something that left the blonde thoroughly gobsmacked. Hanging between his index finger and thumb were two pieces of balloon rubber. Naruto watched, bemused, as he stretched one open. His cheeks then bulged a little, almost as if about to throw up, prompting Naruto to take a step forward in concern. Instead of disgusting bodily fluid, however, water was spat directly into the balloon, filling it up. Jiraiya tied it closed and repeated the process with the other one. One of them was tossed in his direction, which he caught and stared at for a little while, still as confused as before. Jiraiya switched his gaze between his protege and Tobirama, who had come nearer to observe. Watch closely, he instructed, holding the object out a bit. Naruto dutifully listened, too curious to do anything else, and was taken aback when protrusions began appearing all over the balloon and the thing burst into pieces, the water spilling out violently. This ought to help you with your chakra control. Don't ask me how exactly I did that, figure it out for yourself. The basic idea, though, is to use chakra to pop open the balloon, the Toad Sage explained, pulling out a small sack filled to the brim with balloons. He turned to leave after giving it but stopped for a moment. Oh, and you can't use nature transformation, pure chakra manipulation only. Don't be surprised if you don't get it by the time we hit the road. In fact, I don't expect you to. Naruto pouted with indignation as a plume of smoke covered his form, the man nowhere to be found when it dispersed. Taking the last comment as a challenge, he put the sack away into his pouch and got into a ready stance with the balloon in his hand. He was gonna prove that old pervert wrong, and rub his eventual success in his ward nose. With his focus on the rubber object, he missed Tobirama gazing pensively at the spot where Jiraiya had disappeared. Nodding decisively, he turned to his great-grandson, finding him in deep concentration, the balloon he was holding moving in a manner that indicated that all the water inside was being rotated in a single direction. Having already deduced that the idea was to make the liquid churn in multiple directions simultaneously, he opted to follow the sanin's instructions and let Naruto work it out on his own, but later. He had a new task for the young shinobi. Put it away, Naruto. You can continue that exercise tomorrow. Right now, I'm going to teach you a new jutsu, the undead Kage commanded. Before that, however, we'll take a lunch break and a short respite. Undo the seals. An excited gleam entered the boy's eyes, quickly dropping the balloon by his side. Closing his eyes, he sent a small surge of chakra throughout his body and felt a literal weight lift off his shoulders. On their first day of physical training, his grandfather had placed a seal drawn on a paper tag on each of his limbs and his torso. What they did was multiply the weight of the body part upon activation, based on intent. In his mind, he dubbed them as levels. During today's training, under Tobirama's advice, he had used level 1.5, meaning his body had become 1.5 times heavier. While it wasn't much initially, he had soon realized that extended periods of time under the increased weight had eaten away at his stamina and forced him to really push himself in order to maintain his usual speed, strength, and agility. When doing physical workouts, he'd up the ante and use level 2, since he'd be active in shorter but more intense bursts. What jutsu are you gonna teach me, Grandpa? Naruto asked intently, hoping it would be very useful and, more importantly, stunningly awesome. His ancestor didn't answer right away. Instead, smoke suddenly engulfed his shape, the same way it did Pervy Sage. He stood and stared, dumbfounded, before the second Hokage's voice from behind startled the living daylights out of him. Tell me, have you ever heard of the body flicker jutsu? I should have foreseen this. Kabuto Yakushi adjusted his glasses in that way of his that Orochimaru found both annoying and endearing. I'm afraid, my lord, that nobody could have anticipated this outcome, he assured him, his voice almost as silky as his own. The reanimation jutsu is his creation, and the man certainly has no lack of caution. It's why he's my favorite Hokage, after all, the snake summoner replied, a mild note of frustration in his voice. They were at one of his hideouts a few miles east of the village hidden in the grass, having decided that the Land of Sound would have been the first choice of where to look in case of potential pursuers. Besides, this was one of his lucky bases, where the rate of success with his experiments had been relatively high thus far. It was made worse when he had to start taking medication for his failing body. Nothing we can do about it now, I suppose. We should be grateful that we and the 4 of the Sound 5 had made it out alive. If I may ask, what are your current plans? His loyal subordinate asked. Orochimaru leaned his head against his fist, considering his options. Tobirama Senju's presence made things difficult, no doubt having made the decision to remain within the mortal realm to hunt him down. At least, the reanimated shinobi didn't have access to his full power, 75% at most. And even with his speed and proficiency at teleportation ninjutsu, he was far from clairvoyant. Sasuke, Orochimaru answered finally. We have to bring him into the fold. As long as Itachi lives, and the curse mark permeates his being, his ties to the village will be tenuous at best. However, I imagine Sarutobi-sensei will bulk up the border patrols due to the invasion, as well as to give the impression of strength to the Leaf's rivals, which means sending your subordinates to retrieve him would be a lost cause, seeing as you're no longer in the condition to undertake such a risky operation yourself, Kabuto stated with full confidence. Though he often appreciated the silver-haired man's bluntness, it could be awfully aggravating when he was in no mood of being reminded of the obvious. Unfortunately, but all is not lost. I merely need time to figure something out. I understand, Lord Orochimaru. Kabuto paused then, causing his leader to look at him curiously. One thoughtful silence later, his right-hand man spoke. What about Lady Tsunade? If she were to hear of the second Hokage's revival, with a few facts twisted to our benefit, could we convince her to fight against the Leaf? From what I heard, she's been away from her home village for almost 20 years. There must be some love lost there, Orochimaru smirked. That right there, that ability to come up and consider previously unconsidered plans was one of the many reasons the medic and spy had become his top subordinate, and the only one he could honestly admit he trusted. Not fully, of course, but he could rely on Kabuto to judiciously act on his own without his personal direction. It was an efficient system in his opinion, one henchman to advise him, contradict him even should he feel it necessary, and a host of nigh blindly loyal followers to do his every bidding. Even he wasn't arrogant enough to claim the monopoly of being right all the time. Having a single subordinate, A highly intelligent and practical one to keep him focused and bounce ideas off of was plenty. It lowered the risks of treachery, and even should treachery occur, it could be stamped out quickly and with extreme prejudice. A very unorthodox idea, but I'm afraid it's a moot point. The news will soon spread that it was I who brought her great-uncle and grandfather back from the dead. Even should we reach her first, the farce would only last so long. Shouldn't we be worried about her returning to the Leaf then? She might want to seek vengeance on you should that tidbit of information reach her, Kabuto said somewhat worriedly. I wouldn't fret too much, Kabuto. She's grown rather disillusioned with the way of the shinobi, not to mention her hemophobia prevents her from engaging in direct combat. Not that I can guarantee that the condition still ails her. In her heart, that woman will always be a medic, so it's possible she's cured herself of it, Orochimaru commented. For that very reason, he decided not make an assassination attempt on her either. The Sound Five were among the only ones he could trust to get the job done, and even with them, the chances of success would have been slim. Now was not the time to risk the lives of his most capable soldiers. Yes. I kind of admire her myself. If memory serves me well, she's the one who came up with the one medic per squad system, including several other medical reforms, Kabuto said. The sanin chuckled in amusement. Oh, the irony? Actually, it was I who suggested the idea to her, and she brought it forth to the Hokage and his council. One of my better ideas, but I do regret somewhat the influx of recruits for the medical corps it caused, saving the lives of a lot of hidden leaf ninja in the field. Your idea, Lord Orochimaru? His medic asked before smirking. Truly, your genius knows no bounds. It's a shame the obvious logistical difficulties ensured that system remained nothing more than a suggestion and a dream, though. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes at the cheeky young man. Don't bother buttering me up if you're just going to insult me in turn, Kabuto. I might just snap and end your life. Of course, my lord, his top subordinate answered, completely unfazed. The snake summoner elected to ignore his lip. By the way, I should start choosing candidates for the transference ritual. Whether Sasuke is brought here on time or no, it's best that we be prepared. Yes, do that, Orochimaru conceded with a wave of his hand. In the meantime, I will figure something out on bringing him to me. Soon, the power of the Sharingan will be in my hands. Anko found it hard to believe it had already been nearly a week and a half. Standing by the entrance of one of the Hokage Tower's lounge rooms, she patiently waited for Kakashi to show up. It was time for the first progress report on their assigned students, and the snake summoner had plenty to disclose to her boss about her charge. Hard to admit, but most of was positive. Not that she hadn't trusted Cyclops' judgment, but doubts about the arrangement plagued her even now. Still, she'd had her fair share of fun beating down one Sakura Haruno and building her back up over and over again. She'd made sure to go all militaristic on her ass these last 8 days. Private Bubblegum had certainly needed it, and still did, but Anko firmly believed in giving credit where credit was due, and she had to give it to Sakura, though she didn't know whether she ought to give more credit for the amount of surprise she'd incited in her sensei, or for how much she exceeded her expectations. The genin wasn't quite the natural-born prodigy like her Uchiha friend, but she thrummed with untapped potential, which Anko had been doing her best to bring out. The surprises had come in small amounts that she'd taken note of but quickly brushed off at the time. However, now that she was about to give her first assessment, and had to sum all these little surprises up into one, well, she'd known Kakashi was wicked smart, but fuck, this was scary intuitive. As usual, his deduction had been spot on. The two kunoichi were compatible in a way that made the older one both eager and unsettled. Their uncanny similarities aside, Anko had no intention of establishing some touchy-feely sort of rapport modern-day teachers seemed so fond of doing. How were they supposed to build character and cultivate skill if they decided to get all soft on their kids? However one sliced it, the job of the senseis was to raise soldiers ready to storm the fields of battle and engage in shadowy warfare that defined their very profession and permeated it like blood in their veins. Not treat them like precious baby cousins pawned off on you by your shitty, deadbeat uncle or something. They were not supposed to be family, and for a very good reason. Students could die on you at any second out there, and the only thing that bringing personal feelings into play would accomplish was to make shinobi lose all sense of composure and act like a bunch of hysterical mothers, impairing their ability to properly prioritize. Seriously, these people needed a reality check. The field was the last place for that sort of emotionally charged, self-destructive conduct. Anko Mitarashi was staying far away from that. Yes, sir, hence her deliberate attempts to maintain an emotional distance. Sakura Haruno was a job, nothing more, and she would make sure it stayed that way. But more than that, there was something about the brat that tugged at her, something that made her more acerbic than usual and yet caused a weird desire to reach out and help to well in her insides. She figured out what it was a while ago. Barely keeping herself from gritting her teeth, she pressed down on the flash of images and emotions, memories she'd long attempted to bury, willing them to just go away and, "Yo, Anko." She turned her gaze towards the familiar voice, Kakashi strolling her way with someone else a bit behind him. "Lazy bones," she returned in greeting. When the two came closer, her back went taut at recognizing her friend's companion. "Lord Second, Miss Mitarashi," he replied politely with a nod. The undead man stopped in front of the door and knocked a couple of times. Kakashi leaned in close to her ear. Last time I saw you so straight-backed, you just learned the dango shop was closing for a month due to renovations. I didn't think you so drab as to have a thing for the half-dead sort of guy, he whispered teasingly. An elbow to his arm and an angry flush was her response. Shut the fuck up, Hitaki, she hissed. This ain't the time for one of your damn mind games. And in front of the second friggin' Hokage, too. The white-haired Jonin had a penchant for fucking with people's minds known to everybody and their dead dog, but now, of all times, for it to crop up, Kakashi merely proceeded to enter the lounge, ignoring to answer her in that nonchalant way of his that was both dickish and made one wonder how the hell does he do that. Not that she had any intention to find out, being far from short on her own objectionable personality quirks. Huffing, she followed in after him, resolving to get back at him later maybe. The Hokage was sitting in an armchair by the desk, opposite of them, and smoking his usual pipe. Thank God he was more conscientious of where he blew the smoke than his son, making sure to release the fumes in small amounts to the side. That smokestack fiendissima would just blow it wherever, like a dog taking a shit in the middle of the road. Hadn't that idiot been a guardian of the feudal lord once? She'd have figured that observing courtroom politics would have at least him taught some modicum of manners. Apparently not, though she probably wasn't one to judge. While Tobirama Senju remained standing, as rigid as the tales described him to be, Kakashi and her elected to sit down. No sense in needlessly making your joints ache when a semi-official report could easily be given in a comfortable position. The Hokage obviously shared Anko's sentiment. If he'd wanted it to be all formal, this meeting would have been held in the Hokage's office. I'm glad to see all three of you could make it, the old man said, smiling, though holding a tint of severity that implied the importance of this meeting. Now, let's begin with the individual assessments. Sensei, with full confidence, I can say that Kakashi's initial account of Naruto's abilities was largely accurate, Tobirama declared. With Master Jiraiya's advice, the training was predominantly focused on augmenting his chakra control and refining his fundamental skills, mostly his taijutsu and basic education. The training thus far, though not without obstacles, has yielded promising results. That's reassuring. I remember well the exact meaning that the phrase promising results held for you, Tobirama-sensei, the third Hokage said in fond remembrance. What about these obstacles? I hope it's nothing too worrisome. The second Hokage paused for a moment, seeming to contemplate how best to present his thoughts. Physically, Naruto excels. The recovery rate and durability he inherited from his mother's clan ensure that the pace and frequency of the workout regimen are grueling without any setbacks. His strength, speed, and agility were already above average, and they further improved in the last 10 days, the reanimated shinobi elaborated. Tobirama's face tightened a bit at the biggest issue with Naruto's training. No, the mental aspect is the one that could be problematic. He's not lacking in intelligence, but his mindset and attitude are questionable, to say the least. He often needs outside incentive to remain focused. His self-control is inadequate at best, and his general conduct leaves a lot to be desired. He hated to admit it, but a swell of disappointment and shame rose at the reminder of his great-grandson's thorough naivete and almost complete lack of emotional discipline. Even excitable Hashirama had exercised sound judgment more often than not, outside of his relationship with Madara. But Naruto was. It was like he failed to understand that ninja were meant to be soldiers before warriors, an organized group of disciplined, military personnel and not a band of idealistic fighters who used their hearts to dictate their approach to battle. If not, then the boy obviously had a very faulty notion of what a soldier was. I believe that's a little harsh, Lord Second, Kakashi commented with an idle note of concern. Tobirama gave him a grave look. A harsh truth isn't any less valid. Hard to blame him. He's had little to minimal support in the face of the village's ostracization and had to find ways to cope on his own. Should we really blame the kid if his coping mechanisms are a bit iffy then? He knew that. Of course, he knew that. But the Jonin was still not looking at the big picture. Regardless, I can't afford to coddle him, and he can afford it even less. Emotions have a time and place, and it's not during a mission. Naruto's already an active duty shinobi. I can't in good conscience send him out to possible combat scenarios if I were to take his disciplined training at a snail's pace. He needs experience as much as anything else, but as it stands, his conduct would put both him and his comrades in danger. I will not subject him to that if it can be avoided. And I most certainly won't stake my hopes on him learning such a lesson by putting him and others at needless risk, Tobirama proclaimed with finality. Frankly, he's beyond fortunate he survived so far. The grave errors he made during the wave mission would have spelled Team 7's doom had your enemy been just a mite more ruthless. The second Hokage had rarely ever felt as much embarrassment as when he'd heard about Naruto's blunders during the course of that mission, in particular during the bridge battle. Revealing himself to the enemy instead of striking from the shadows, and blindly charging into the ice mirrors when he should have forced Haku on the defensive with a war on two fronts, him on the outside and Sasuke on the inside. Tactics and common sense, thrown to the wind just like that. Also he could look like a hero. Had Haku been a smidge more merciless, Naruto would have been killed early on, Sasuke soon after, probably followed by Kakashi after Haku and Zabuza ganged up on him, and finally, Sakura and the bridge builder. More than that, as the leaf would not have wasted men on a venture with no economic benefits. Their death in that battle would have seen the land of waves' continued subjugation going on unchecked. All because Naruto wanted to look like a hero. Haku had been special, an unlikely sort of enemy. The sort shinobi didn't normally meet on the field. The success of the wave mission could not be hinged upon as an example of proper conduct on Naruto's part. In his mind, Tobirama had little doubt he saw it as good justification to continue his unique way of doing things. Kakashi at least had the grace to look a bit sheepish at the reminder. By all means, he should have been sterner, and had even planned to give him a serious lecture regarding those stunts of his. But when the blonde boy had confessed his fondness for the two former enemies, Kakashi's heart had gone out to him. Naruto understood that enemy did not necessarily mean evil person. He understood that enemies were just people, fellow humans, but with goals of their own. The Jonin sensei hadn't wanted to snuff that out. There were more than enough ninja who spilled blood without mercy and hesitation. Surely, his sensei's son didn't need to be one of those too. So, he just agreed and left it at that. When had he gotten so soft? Was it really worth it if it only encouraged an attitude that, in their line of work, made him a liability to himself and others? The main issue, Lord Second, is that Naruto has suffered and had to deal with this ostracization since the time he could remember his first independent potty time. Everything about him, all of his habits, his demeanor, even his ideology are rooted in his coping mechanisms, Kakashi elaborated. Loud all the time? Kinda makes it hard not to notice him. Wears bright orange. Probably hopefully because it makes him stand out. He gave the former Kage a pointed look. Worships heroes and the folktale principles of heroism? Because everybody loves a hero. Though he conceded the point, Tobirama narrowed his eyes at the insinuation. I fail to understand what you're getting at. Are you saying I should just let him run amok whenever he gets emotional or just feels like it? Ignore protocol and the chain of command simply because he disagrees? You know very well that's unacceptable. All due respect, Lord Second, all I'm saying is that you can't force the issue. The white-haired Jonin sighed. You'll sooner make it worse than better. Tear apart the foundation with thoughtless abandon, and everything collapses in a way you can't build back up. Naruto's more fragile than he shows. Please exercise caution. I feel like we're going off on a tangent here, Anko piped in just as the second Hokage was about to argue. While the topic was certainly of great importance, she didn't want to be here any longer than needed. The two could have a go at each other without wasting her time. We're here to submit the individual reports on the former team's 7 members. Naruto Uzumaki ain't the only one we came here to talk about. Excellent point, Anko, Hiruzen agreed, giving the other two an unimpressed look, as if chiding a couple of brats. Well, technically speaking, Anko figured he was older than both of them. Kakashi, while your opinion should and will be taken into account, Tobirama Sensei is Naruto's assigned tutor. I trust his judgment and experience to take the appropriate measures in training his student, just as I trust you with yours. Somewhat reluctant, the Hatake bowed deferentially. My apologies, Lord Hokage. The village leader easily accepted that with a nod. In any case, is that all, Tobirama Sensei? Anything else of note? The shadow clone training method has proven fruitful. He has completed the first steps to mastering water and wind style, as well as learned a jutsu of each element along with the body flicker jutsu. That sums up my report. That does sound promising, Hiruzen commented before turning to Kakashi and giving him an expectant stare. The man adjusted himself to a more attentive position in his seat, coughing into his hand. Sasuke has shown steady progress in all of his skills. Most of the training has been focused on expanding his chakra capacity and diminishing the Sharingan's strain on it. As such, he's been keeping it active while doing a variety of physical exercises in order to increase his strength and stamina. Aside from some sparring and another fire jutsu, nothing else noteworthy happened. And the curse mark? The Hokage asked, and Anko perked up at the question, curious to hear. Fortunately, he's shown a fairly strong disinclination to using it. He's well aware of Orochimaru's nature. He knows the mark isn't a gift. There was a barely noticeable sag in the old man's shoulders, the only indication of his relief. Good. I'm glad to hear that. And finally, Hiruzen glanced her way. Anko? This was her last chance. The only thing she had to do to put permanent distance between herself and the pink-haired girlie was put a few lies here and there, give some half-truths to make it convincing, and she'd be free of her conflicted emotions. Easy as pie. Only, she remembered Sakura's eagerness to train, her resolve to improve, and how she managed to exceed expectations when all Anko had expected was for her to fall flat or cop out. She hated how it affected her. That alone ought to be enough to break off the whole thing. But she was a hidden leaf ninja. She had a duty to the Hokage and her village. She would not let her emotions get in the way. Sakura Haruno has shown greater aptitude than expected. While mediocre at best in the physical aspect, she's very driven. She works hard, though is obviously not accustomed to an extended workout regimen. Her chakra control is off the charts for her age, and her chakra capacity has the latent potential to grow to above average levels. She possesses the primary affinities for earth and fire, with a rather weak secondary one for lightning. Notably, she's ambidextrous and precise with her hands and very skilled in using hand signs. Control-wise, she was able to quickly grasp the needs of the 2 jutsu I've taught her so far. As it is, her taijutsu is average at best, but she's making improvements. Remarkable chakra control and hand-eye coordination, you say? I recall that young Sakura also excelled academically in her class. Have you thought of adding medical jutsu to her repertoire? Hiruzen asked her. It crossed my mind, but I barely know more than first aid myself, Lord Hokage. I couldn't teach her even if I wanted to. She let a small smirk grace her face. Besides, I don't think she'd want me to. I saw it in her eyes. The girl wants to fight. Frankly speaking, closing her eyes, she took a quick breath through her nose and steeled herself to give what was sure to be the final nail in her coffin. She has the potential for combat. All ninjas should have skill in combat. Otherwise, it'd be ridiculous to send them out and risk their lives, cause it wouldn't be a risk at all but a certainty. You know what I meant, Hataki. The old man sent her a knowing smile, gentle and holding the traces of a smirk at the edges. The kunoichi didn't have it in her to be annoyed at him. Good. I thank you all for submitting your report. For all intents and purposes, this arrangement seems to be working out quite nicely. I'm eager to hear more in the future. Now, I believe you and Naruto have a mission to prepare for, Tobirama Sensei. Taking it for the dismissal it was, the 3 inclined their heads respectfully and began filtering out. However, just as she was about to walk past the door, Anko stopped. After a few short seconds of contemplating her next course of action, she turned back around, sidestepping Kakashi who'd been right behind her. Don't wait for me, she informed him. Obviously curious, he nodded nonetheless and left the room with the click of the door echoing in the back. Anko? Is there something you forgot to add in the report? The village leader inquired. Why her? The old man blinked. Beg your pardon? Why Sakura Haruno? She growled, frustration evident in her tone. Hiruzen, though, could see it wasn't aimed at him specifically. There's a shitload of good candidates for private tutorship among the Leaf's greenhorns, like Niji Hyuga or Shino Aburame. Hell, even that indolent jackass Shikamaru Nara. So, Lord Hokage, why Sakura Haruno? If I recall, you said she has potential. She sure didn't look it at first, she argued. Mediocre mission performance at best, subpar physical skills, and no special talents outside chakra control, and I don't even want to talk about her approach to the ninja lifestyle. Do you think you would have liked training those other ones you mentioned? He asked, calm as usual. Fuck no, she admitted bluntly. The Aburame and the Hyuga are more machine than man, and the latter's 10-foot stripper pole in his anus would have gotten real annoying real fast. With the Nara, I probably would have snapped sooner rather than later and cut off his ponytail and burned it in a ritualistic ceremony with the hopes of curing the lazy assness out of their bloodline. She then gave her boss a serious look. But it's not about pleasure, it's about the job. If it was best for the village, I would have sucked it up and done it, and I appreciate your dutifulness, but you see, the human factor has to be taken into account when making decisions, Anko. It's not something that can be ignored so easily as many shinobi like to think. Sakura is obviously a preferable candidate to you than the other 3, so I gave the clearance when you and Kakashi proposed it. Well, I ain't sounding real happy right now, am I? Not because she's incompatible with you, though, he said with a tone of sharp understanding, as if knowing something she didn't. If that was it, you wouldn't have admitted her aptitude as you did while snubbing the other genin. Anko resisted the impulse to cast her gaze to the side like a child, unwilling to verbally confess the truth behind that statement. Nobody could have known the 2 of us were compatible back then, especially judging by appearances. Objectively, it looked like you assigned one of your best shinobi to teach a run-of-the-mill genin at a time of tension when cultivating talent should take top priority. Kakashi appeared plenty sure. She waved a hand dismissively. He's her sensei. Bias compromises his judgment. He hasn't forgotten his duty nor has he abandoned his good sense. If there'd been someone better suited than you, he would have hired them even if they had half your strength, Hiruzen countered before blowing out a puff of smoke. And besides, Sakura is of less importance than her teammates, so her situation is more flexible than theirs. Had you come into my office today and deemed the arrangement a lost cause, I would have dissolved it then and there. You're well aware of that. A pointed look was sent her way. But you didn't. Instead, you argued for her continued training under your care and essentially deemed her a diamond in the rough, even by your lofty standards. Anko definitely didn't shift a bit when his gaze turned more perceptive. It's almost like you're complaining solely about having met and spent some time with her. This time, she did look to the side, gritting her teeth in shame and chagrin. Damn, she really was bitching solely about that. And she just acted like a spoiled little brat in front of her boss, for whom she had the utmost respect. What the fuck was wrong with her? What was this kid doing to her? More importantly, why was she letting it happen? She had thicker skin than this. She'd handled way worse than instructing some little girl who was similar to her in all the most unsettling ways. A sigh brought her attention back to the Hokage. I see the past still bothers you, Anko. He ignored her posture stiffening. Child, you need to let it go. It's been 10 years already. You're far from the first to make a costly mistake, and you certainly aren't the last. She merely grunted, not admitting anything. She had no desire to talk about that particular issue, not with private bubblegum already unwittingly inducing some unpleasant flashbacks. You still didn't answer my question, Lord Hokage. Why did you agree to appoint me as Sakura's tutor? He tapped his fingers against the table rhythmically, taking a few moments to formulate the best response. When you and Kakashi came to me with the proposal, I admit to having doubts. However much I didn't want to leave Sakura Haruno unattended, assigning one of my best jonin to take over her training duties was questionable, at the very least. But I trusted Kakashi's intuition and for him to weigh the village's needs with the needs of his students, so I simply figured I would give you a limited time window to appraise Sakura and determine if training her would be in the Hidden Leaf's best interest. Something clicked in Anko's mind. Is that why you asked us to submit our reports today? To see whether my arrangement with her is successful or not? It's the central reason, yes. Naruto and Sasuke's assessments were also given for their own sake, since their circumstances aren't quite as subject to change as Sakura's. Tobirama Sensei is Naruto's family, and Kakashi is the only one who can help Sasuke with the Sharingan. A contemplative silence enveloped the room for a moment, but there's more to it than that. Anko couldn't help leaning forward slightly, interested to hear his answer. What is it, Lord Hokage? His visage adopted smile that she'd best describe as nostalgic. I thought that, maybe, these three youngsters could be the Hidden Leaf's new sanin. For an instant, the purple-haired woman was stumped. She prepared herself for some factor that had gone over her head but not the Hokage's. But this possibility had never crossed her mind, not even fleetingly. Kinda hard to imagine that scenario with Naruto Uzumaki and Sakura Haruno, the dumbass and the prissy bookworm being part of the team. New sanin. Thinking about the term made her mind wander to the original sanin, the three most powerful leaf shinobi of their time, and grimaced. You see, these three have formed quite the team, with Naruto and Sasuke standing out in particular. If she is to catch up and keep pace with those two, she needs a powerful teacher. Who better than Anko Mitarashi? Having confirmed yourself just how compatible you two appear to be, he chuckled lightly. Well, then, I suppose the job is officially yours now.